Right. So this is just the informal part of the meeting where we feed back from our visits. So just give everyone a minute or two to sit down. And then we'll make a start. So the first one on my list is James Marsh, Peter Kane and Yin Jones. The list says you were going to the Diabetes Centre and the Booking Centre. Did that happen?
It did.
And who's feeding back, James?
I think Peter's going to start.
Okay.
I'm going to start on the diabetic service, and Yin will take over on the outpatients service, and James will then follow up. So basically, the diabetic service, we arrived, it's quite quiet. It was just getting going for the day, but clearly was going to get busy in the waiting area. They've got around about 9 diabetic specialists, nurses covering both dietitians, psychologists, as well as those dealing directly with the conditions. We established that the 2 things that they were proudest of, one was that they offer a responsive service, flexible in terms of both patients and other partners that need to be engaged, and secondly, the strength of the team. Good effective leadership, good communication, and we got that just from who we were talking with, as a sense within the department. So that was great. Areas of some pressure, overall staffing in a reasonably good place, but resources and enough space to be able to run all the clinics can be a challenge at times, but overall actually it seemed in a reasonably good place. An area for improvement they're looking at is around the pump service, which is the technological developments in that area, and they're keen to develop that further over the next year. Reasonably good contacts with GPs, primary care, more so in Sutton is strong. Work to do on with the Merton kind of community service, and on diversity, reasonably good on language. They do monitor the profile of the patients, but it seemed again an area which they might do a little bit more of going forward. So that's a brief summary.
Thank you, Peter. Very clear. Anything to add on diabetes, James?
I think we'll just quickly talk about the outpatients booking centre, if we may. So the outpatients booking centre looks after 22 different specialities, doesn't look after everything, including renal and ophthalmology. And they have different pods. So one team will look after the GP referrals, another team would look after the sort of call centre. We found it very impressive because I think whilst we were there was not any sort of calls waiting, and I think the average time it takes for the calls to be sort of answered, or most calls are answered within 2 minutes, which is pretty impressive, I think. And then there were about 500 to 700 calls a day. As of 9:30 a.m., they had answered 48 calls, which is again impressive. And also, I think they have about roughly 32 people who are whole-time equivalents. They, when Peter asked them what they were most proud of, they said that they were proud of their team. And they also felt that they were well staffed. So it was a pleasure to visit, and thanks to Jane, who hosted our visit. Thank you.
Thank you, Yin. It is a great team there. I love going there. It really buoys you up, doesn't it, James?
So just to reinforce that, I really, it's immediately apparent when you walk in there, the sense of team, there's a bustle, there's a sense of care between the managers and the team. I asked one of the call handlers about how frequently they receive verbal abuse, because people are often very stressed when they're trying to change outpatient appointments, and sadly every day they experience challenging conversations. But she did say the support she had from colleagues and management was really impressive, and they really did look after each other. And I think the other sense of team that comes through year in, year out is that every year they win the Christmas door decoration competition.
Yeah, it's a very good measure, isn't it, James?
Jenny, there was just one other point I think which is important in terms of wider discussion about the extent to which they're working with the George's side, and they start from a position where here there's a much stronger record. You know, that I think the scope for George's to learn. They lose 1,000 calls here. I think it's 9,000 at George's by way of comparison, and the delays in responding to calls are much shorter here. So there are some discussions that have been started. We heard that there would be more next week, but it seemed like an example of where there's real potential from closer collaboration. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much indeed, Peter. So next on my list, I've got James Blythe, Andrew Grinshaw and Tim. Who's feeding back? Tim, you?
I think it's me to start, if that's okay, Gillian.
Of course, yes.
Yes, so we've just come back from, rather hurriedly, from pathology, which I have to say is an area that's very easy to spend a lot of time in. Absolutely fascinating. Yes, or I was just going to. That's where I was going to start. Really, it was right up my street. This was the combination of engineering and IT really brought together. And I was just saying to Andrew on the way back, you know, in the contrast when you're walking from a clinical area on a ward and dealing with some of the issues there, and then seeing the sort of high-tech environment that sits behind them and provides that service, I thought was absolutely fascinating. So we looked at haematology, chemistry and microbiology. My understanding is haematology deals with whole bloods and samples, and chemistry, they centrifuge them down and separate them out. And I think the level of automation was what was really interesting. And I think some of the things I learned there is I didn't realise that all samples that are taken are held for 7 days, untouched by human hand. I mean, these samples are put into and removed from a fridge, you know, by a robotised system. And the idea there, of course, is that as tests are done, if there are any random tests, or a GP comes back or a consultant comes back and says, you know, we need to do some further tests, they can electronically pull that sample back within 7 days, within that 7-day window, and do retests or further tests. So I thought that was quite an interesting bit of sort of flow management, really, that goes on. Capacity was interesting to hear. I mean, we've got machinery down there which, in fact, only installed 18 months ago, so it's very new equipment. Of course, it's part of South West London pathology rather than just Epsom St Helier. So we were hearing that some of the samples that they're dealing with obviously deal with the samples from the hospital here, also deal with the influx of samples coming in from GPs in the area, but also pulling in samples from Leicester, Northern Ireland, Scotland sometimes, to do specific tests. So, you know, dealing with the logistics of all of that was quite impressive. Capacity down there is about 100,000 tests a day, but actually running at about 7,000. So I think there's two things there. One is to recognise that, of course, we need to have a high level of resilience and redundancy in the equipment that's there, but actually it's part of, this is quite a new sort of service that's sort of building, really. So there will be more that will happen, I think, over the next sort of period. Talked a little bit about the integration and co-working with the rest of South West London, obviously particularly with St George's. So that was quite interesting to hear how that works. Did surface some concerns about the IT that sits behind that. Of course, the service is sort of in transition at the moment. Obviously, Cerner is coming along, so these high-tech tools are currently integrated to the EPR system that is in use here at the moment, and we need, obviously need to move that over to Cerner. They've been doing quite a lot of tests in that area with really good results. I mean, worth recognising that actually the integration of Cerner to this equipment is been done many times before. It's not unique to us, so it's an off-the-shelf integration, really. So yes, a really interesting time spent. You can probably hear from my rambling on a bit too much, but I don't know if James had anything particular. So I know that it was involved in a number of conversations there with people about some of the minutiae of issues they're dealing with.
Well, can I just say, Tim, that your enthusiasm was infectious. You weren't rambling at all. I listened to every single word. It was really interesting. Thank you. But James, you've got some specifics to add?
Not in particular, to be honest. I think that that my reflection from it is that obviously we did the transition from ESTH run labs to South West London Pathology a couple of years ago. That has enabled us to do a number of things sort of technically and in terms of scale. I think the reflection always is that culture and mindset is the thing that takes longer to change. There were a number of things raised with us that are, I think, about how we sort of work collectively around the estate, around IT, around the interface between clinical services at ESTH and then South West London Pathology Services. And I think they're all part of a progression, but I mean, Andrew and I's reflection as we were just sort of heading back was, that we need to continue to work very actively to manage the interface between the ESTH site and South West London Pathology, and continue to pay attention to those cultural issues, because they are ultimately a large part of what will determine how successful the arrangement is, and a very significant part of determining how successful it's perceived to be by clinicians on the ground as well.
So some carefully worded notes of caution there, I think, James. Yeah, Andrew.
And I was just going to add to that, just to remind the board that isn't just an Epsom St Helier George's issue as well. We are the provider of services into Kingston and Croydon, and we have staff based on those trusts as well. So those issues play through that, and we need to be conscious of that, and we need to potentially think about how we visit them as well at some point.
Good point, Andrew. Thank you. So moving on, next on my list I've got Andrew Asprey, Thurza and Andrew Murray.
Yes.
Did that happen?
It definitely did happen.
Oh,
yes.
This list is working today.
Yeah.
Yeah, Andrew.
We visited adult audiology, and it was a really good visit. It was really encouraging. We got a warm welcome. The department deals with hearing loss and dizziness, hearing loss, predominantly age-related hearing loss. We had a warm welcome from the reception team. We were challenged on our ID appropriately. In fact, I didn't have one. And then the main conversation was with Nicola, who was head of adult audiology, and we also spoke to one of the audiologists. So I was struck by the pride that they take in the service, and they really feel they offer a high quality service, better than many of the private sector providers. So they're really proud of that, and the culture in the department came across really positively. There was a real sense of team spirit and pride in what they're doing. Their performance is good. So the waiting time for adult audiology is about 3 weeks, which is pretty impressive. For children's services, so we do have children's audiology on site here in Queen Mary's Hospital for Children. The waiting times there are 14 weeks, so that is more challenged, but adult is going well. And then we looked at the rooms and equipment. So they've got a number of soundproofed rooms, which are really impressive, modern, well-specced, really tidy. So it is a great department. We talked about sort of development of the service and what they wanted to see. They would love to be able to have direct access for patients referring in, rather than them having to go through GPs, because they often end up seeing people quite late in their hearing loss journey, and they get a more effective outcome if they intervene earlier. They don't see why patients have to go through their GP. So something to think about. And then the other challenge that they talked about was the issue of recruitment and career progression. So it's really difficult to find and recruit audiologists. They just don't exist. And then it's a challenge as well in keeping people, because there's a lack of opportunities for career progression. I did ask the question about sort of, was there benefit in working at scale and thinking about kind of joint working with the George's audiology department that has the same challenges. That wasn't in the mindset at the moment. So it was interesting thinking about sort of future discussion. There wasn't a concept of group. It was, well, George's are in the same system, but they're a different place, and people working here wouldn't want to work at George's and vice versa. So scope to think about that for a service where there's real challenges around recruitment and career progression, I think. But it was a really good visit.
Lovely, thank you very much, Andrew. Did either Thurza or Andrew Asprey, did you want to add something, Andrew?
It was just to say, if you'll excuse my nostalgia, one of my first jobs in the 90s was designing audiology suites, and that that is one of the best. So I've been in very many of them, and that is one of the best technical I've ever seen. And it's interesting because it's 6 years old, the refurbishment, but you walk in there and it looks as if it was delivered yesterday. So I think that pride in the service has been reflected as well by the way that they look after the facility. So I really enjoyed it.
Lovely, thank you, Andrew. I didn't know that about your first job, but I have visited audiology here. I do think it's fantastic. I mean, I obviously have a special interest since I'm a hearing aid user, but they are a great team. Right, so next on the list is Richard, Stephen, Jenny and Aruna. So who's going to go here? Aruna.
I'll start and then
Yeah.
I'll let my colleagues chip in. So we visited Frank D's and B1, both medical wards. I think the first thing to say is timing on these kind of wards. They were very busy. They were clearing up after breakfast and starting their MDTs. So we kind of slightly felt that if we are going to visit areas like that, we probably need to think about timing. We did manage to speak to the ward manager in Frank D's, 22 beds, 4 side rooms, 18 in bays. They had a bronze accreditation, which we kind of queried, and what is it going to take you to silver type of thing. Estates is what really came up, and I think they were suffering on the back of a heating failure. Right through Christmas, between Christmas and New Year, they had no heating. And they also had the problem of not being able to use sufficient number of portable heaters because they had 4 AC units, there wasn't enough power supply. So in particular, the side rooms were very badly affected, because even if you used 2 heaters on the ward, what happens to the side rooms? You couldn't use more than 2 portable heaters. So I think that is perhaps, it could happen again, and something that probably needs some attention. From a staffing perspective, I think they did have challenges to begin with, but that seems to have resolved itself, and they didn't seem particularly worried about that. The ward was absolutely full. And it is a ward that does boarding, as it's called, and in terms of boarding, they actually fit in either chairs or beds, depending on the patient, in between the beds right now. Not ideal, but they try and keep limited to kind of 1 or 2 hours. So that was Frank D's. I don't know if any of my colleagues want to chip in for Frank D's before I go into B1. Okay, carry on. So B1, slightly more difficult. By the time we got to B1, they were thick into their MDT, couldn't really speak to anyone. B1, slightly different in that it is single-bedded ward, 30 single beds. So a bit of a challenge, really, trying to kind of walk around wards. We did manage to speak to a person and kind of asked, well, if you have a patient that is at risk for, what do you do? With one-to-one nursing, but they try not to take them. Those kind of patients are kind of left in AMU and sort of not brought into the ward. As I said, we didn't really get to talk a lot to people along there, because they were either really busy or in MDT. Richard did ask a question about the makeup of the MDT. I don't know if you want to touch on that, Richard.
I thought that it's only a snapshot, but the MDT looked well run to me, and that everybody turned up at the same time. They were all getting on with it straight after 9. They have, I think, 2 doctors, the discharge coordinator, 2 nurses, allied health professionals. So it looked like the right people were in the room, starting at the right time and getting on with it. And we let our ward manager go so that she could join.
I guess one last thing that I would add is signage. We found ourselves in C1 thinking we were in B1. And we couldn't, on our initial walk, get into Frank D's, actually for a good reason. There's some refurbishing work being done, which is great. So we did ask, well, why can't we go? And it was refurb, which is actually good news, because he talked about a refurb above, and they were getting pipes in the ceiling. So just wanted to add that. But I'm looking to my colleagues to see if there's anything else.
I thought, thanks Aruna, I think you always get the impression that the staff are very caring and welcoming. What they are hampered from doing is limited by the estate. And as well as the recent heating breakdowns, there are just fundamentals like flooring, like pipes, and they cope with it, but I just don't think we should underestimate the additional challenge to both patients and staff from the ongoing estates issues.
Thank you, Jenny. I think the point's really well made. When we get on to the group I was part of, we went into a refurbished part of it and a non-refurbished part of it, and it's just immediately striking the difference. And this wasn't even a complicated area; it was outpatient. So, thank you for that. No other points on that one. No. So that.
James has put his hand up.
Oh, sorry, James.
The only thing I was going to say is we absolutely are aware of some of the heating issues with Frank D's, and we've needed to put in portable heaters and, you know, to do some regular temperature checks. I think it is beginning to resolve itself now, but obviously with the state of the plant, these issues sort of move around the site, so we're sort of constantly working to bring them down. We've also got on the capital plan that we're working up for next year, which is still in draft, obviously it needs approval. One of the things that we have noted is signage. So we don't necessarily do signage every single time something moves, but we know that we're at the point after a few years where we need to do a signage refresh. So we're looking to try and make provision for that. Obviously capital's very constrained, and so it's just how much do we set aside for that, because it's surprisingly expensive versus the other priorities.
Thank you, James. The signage is an inconvenience for sure, but the heating's a real worry, isn't it? And it's not the only part of our estate that suffers in that way. Thank you for that. So the next group was Jacqueline, Angela, our new interim CPO. Welcome, Angela. I will welcome you formally in the formal part of the meeting.
Thank you.
But I'm just conscious we've got some members of the public here now, and so I probably needed to say that. And Anne, you were with them. So I don't know who's reporting back.
I am.
We threw the new girl in. Very mean. I hope you don't mind, Angela.
Not at
Over
all.
to you. At least you've been able to see it's quite informal.
Yeah. So we visited 2 wards. So A3 is a fracture ward, and B1 is an orthopaedic ward. So A3 primarily specialises in hips. It is quite a specialist ward, which is really very interesting because it has, on average, I think the age of the people there are about 80. They can sort of range from the youngest normally tends to be about 65 or in the 60s up to about 101. Their philosophy is that they will get people in, if they have a hip fracture, they will operate within 36 hours, which is the maximum, and have recognised that this is, as the older a person becomes, the more difficult or the more immediate it is the care that you need to be able to give fracture patients. The ward was very calm, it was incredibly clean. We had a very, very warm welcome from the staff there, who said that they felt very supported. We spent a long time talking to them. Probably we ran out a bit more time than we intended to. And very interestingly, so the lady who actually looks after the ward, she actually has worked in private social care and in a care home before coming actually into the ward. So she's seen both sides, which is very interesting. Also, what was very interesting as well is that this specialist ward, they keep them in there for about 21 days on average and try and rehabilitate them. And it is also geriatric as well, so a lot of care, very, very passionate, and a very supportive team. It is mainly an open ward, so they have a few sort of side wards, 20 sort of like beds, I think, in the open ward, 20 odd, and then they've got some in the private, sort of like little rooms at the side. But overall, incredibly clean. I think that they lack a little bit of space, and I think when we asked them, did they feel very supported by management, they did. Interesting as well that one of the staff said that they would very much welcome perhaps going to see how it worked on another ward in maybe St George's or working.
CPR, wasn't it?
Yeah, yeah, very much so. But we had a very warm welcome, and I think they were very supported there. Before I talk about the orthopaedic ward, anything Anne or Jacqueline you'd like to add?
Oh, well, only two things really, and I think it was an interesting conversation around the EPR because their current system, access to IT, was very slow. They said it could take half an hour to log in to the system on what I would consider to be a wow, but it was a very sort of modest workstation on wheels. So they were looking forward to EPR, and in fact Hayley, the ward manager, was part of the working group, and she said that she felt very well listened to as part of that, so that was really encouraging. And the only other point I would make is that they do have a number of patients on that ward with dementia, and it's not a very dementia-friendly environment. They had the dementia-friendly clocks, but if you look at the colour schemes and the sort of the general layout of the ward, for somebody who was already confused, I would have thought that was something. I mean, there's a sort of question as to what happens to that ward post the new hospital, isn't there? But it needs a little bit of work doing on it. The final point that was raised was around visiting, and Jacqueline challenged them because they'd sort of had their visiting in the afternoon, and in order to allow protected meal times and also to allow the work that they do on recovery, you know, and yet the sort of the intranet had been changed seemingly without their knowledge to a sort of open visiting. So Jacqueline had a good exchange about whether or not they could accommodate open visiting, and about how you could encourage family members to be part of, particularly patients with dementia, part of the support and care for patients, which I think was received well, wasn't it, Jacqueline?
Is that the ward? Is it an old Nightingale ward, that one? Whether you've got beds on? Yeah.
It's quite tight.
Yeah, no, I've got it pictured in my mind. I just wanted to check I had the right one.
So the other ward that we visited, so B3, that was actually an orthopaedic ward, which was a 16-bed, which was a different layout because it was in sort of like they had little bays with 4 in at a time. And they were normally sort of like for major trauma. On the whole, it tends to be neck in particular from an orthopaedic, but very often people who have got multiple fractures. So there is no particular length of time on average that people would stay there. It would depend on the injuries. Again, it was incredibly clean, very bright. They had lots of visuals with pictures, some great usage of notice boards, which are very clear as well. Again, enthusiastic staff, very caring, a great atmosphere of calm as well, and ambience, I think, within, which was very soothing really to be in there, despite all the beds being full on both the wards that we went to, and sort of like outliers waiting to get into the wards. But a very positive experience, and a lot of care, I think, went into from the staff in both of the wards that we saw. And Jacqueline, have I missed anything?
I think there were two things. Once again, the EPR came up, and actually there was a band 5 physio on rotation, and she had the laptop open and the notes. So at George's, we know the nightmares of trying to deal with 2 bits, and what are you doing?
Trying to silence it. Stop embarrassing the
but she was really keen on getting the EPR. So we felt a lot of love for trying to get the EPR and wanting to do it. So I thought that was really good. I did ask her, because she talked about receiving the polytrauma from George's. And I said, is there issues in that? And she said, actually there is, because we don't get the protocols. Like there needs to be some protocol for neck, I don't know, injuries. But we haven't got the protocol, and often they're quite delayed in actually sending the information through. So I think we can, maybe between Kate and James, just find a way of doing that. Particularly now we've got a trauma ward, it should be a bit easier feedback. So if, you know, what I'm sure that'll be the same for anybody who receives anybody from polytrauma from George's. So I think those are the only two of the bits I picked up. But yes, they were both brilliant visits. Thank you.
Yeah. Great. I think you just throw the phone out the window. Thank you, Angela. I think you did a brilliant job, given that you were thrown in at the deep end, and I'd only seen a couple of other people doing it. Sorry, thank you. I've been completely distracted by the phone. So the final group was mine, and I was with Arlene and Kate. And I think, Kate, it's you feeding back, is it?
It is, that's right. Thanks, Gillian. So we visited outpatient areas. We visited 4 outpatient areas, I think it was. Was it Arlene 4? And overall impression, so the first area was undertaking dermatology clinics and a lot of surgical clinics. We were welcomed by Suzanne, who's the matron, and Tina, her colleague. Overall impression, well, the environment had been refurbished with new flooring and paint, and actually really nice, so really good. And uncluttered, it felt well organised, not too busy, but things were going on. So we spent a bit of time in that area, then we walked through and looked at another area that was being refurbished. Watched a man doing some amazing sealing on the door. We were quite fascinated by that, weren't we?
We all got very distracted.
Yeah. It's a very satisfying piece of work. And then we moved out into an more of a porta cabin area, and that was quite calm, and the staff were really positive. We went to fracture clinic, and that was quite small and busy, and we managed to speak to an orthopaedic surgeon and his junior, and obviously with Tina there as well. Julian, well, they talked a little bit about, we were pushing them out, anything you want to feed back to the board. A little bit confused about the gesh and what that's all about and what that means for them. So Gillian took the opportunity to push them on what they saw as positive and negatives around that. And I think overall they saw the real opportunities. They weren't always clear about what they were and how it was going to progress, but they, and I guess the things they worried about was losing their local identity. They recognised that St George's was a big organisation and they didn't want to lose their own identity, etc. We had a really good discussion with them, and they were generally very positive, I thought, and could see there were opportunities ahead. And then we finally entered a 4th area of outpatients where rheumatology and various other things were going on. Again, very clear, uncluttered, well organised, but it hadn't been refurbished, had the blue flooring, and it just had a different feel about it. I mean, it all looked very clean, so it wasn't an issue, but you could see the value of the refurbishment was quite significant. So overall, I think it was a really positive visit. Staff seemed positive, busy doing their jobs, were polite and welcoming. Tina and Suzanne had to go off at the beginning because she was going to do a punch biopsy. She was doing some procedures in dermatology clinic, which is great. And then Tina also does those as well, but she had a bit of time to show us around past the Macmillan Centre. So I think it was a really overall a very positive visit. Arlene, is there anything you want to add?
Was there anything you wanted to add, Arlene?
Yeah, just about the staff, the Band 4 in particular, and the implementation of the Band 4 rules in outpatients. And it's been a struggle for that department for a while, but it is something I'll pick up outside with Teresa, because it's not about one individual's preference, which is what seems to be stopping the implementation. So we'll work that through.
Yeah, thank you for making that point. Because we encouraged, as we always do, come on, we want the highs and the lows. And I think the only other point I would add is that what was very compelling to me when we were talking to the orthopaedic consultant and his registrar and Tina, was it Tina? Tracy. Was they were so clear about the patient benefits of better working with George's, and it was very focused on how they would be able to improve pathways and the difference it would make for patients, and that was great. But we then encouraged them to make the point about, well, yeah, okay, that's the pluses, you must have some worries as well. And it was this point about local identity, and we reassured them that, however close the joint working was, you'd still need facilities in localities. So I thought it was a great discussion, actually, and I'm very pleased we were able to have it. So that's brought us to the end of our informal feedback. We've got a few minutes, and I'm going to ask everyone to play a bit of musical chairs, because we've got a lot of Neds together, and a lot of execs together, and it gives the wrong message about a unitary board. Yeah, no, that's better there, but this isn't very good here at all. This is a big bunch of execs, so if we could have a little bit of movement, that would be. You see how reluctant everyone is to move. They've effectively said we're not moving.
Does anyone want to move here?
James, you should be up here. There's 3 Neds there together.
I'm right next. I'm sandwiched.
Honestly.
Yeah.
Right, everybody, it's now time for us to start our formal meeting, and I want to start with some apologies and a welcome. So let's start with, first of all, welcome to everybody and a Happy New Year to those of you whom I haven't yet been able to say that. I've concluded that it's only at the end of this week that you stop saying Happy New Year to people. Once it's halfway through the month, I'm not sure you can get away with it, but I hope you all manage to get some rest and relaxation over the Christmas period. And a big welcome to Angela, who already had her baptism of fire in the informal part of the meeting. Angela is with us for a number of months as our interim Chief Personnel Officer, and we're delighted, Angela, to have you with us. We've got some apologies today. Derek is on holiday, and poor Martin has just gone down with COVID. So we're a bit thin on the Ned ground. And Arlene is only just back from holiday. In fact, I didn't think she was going to be able to make the board, and I thought Steph, who is sitting in the audience, would be representing the chief nurse. But because Arlene's only just back, Stephanie's here in case she needs to fill in any particular details, in case you wonder why we've got both of them here. So I think that's probably all I needed to say under item 1.1. Declarations of interest. Is there anything new that we need to note? No? Okay, so we note those that we're familiar with. And that takes us on to item 1.3, the minutes of the previous meeting. Are people happy with the minutes? Yeah, thank you very much. And in relation to the action log, we've got nothing, have we? And then when we get to private board, we've actually got loads. There's this kind of a very dramatic contrast. But I do have a matter of arising, which is actually specifically for the George's board. With the departure of Stephen Collier, we don't have a senior independent director. We don't actually have one on ESTH, but for foundation trusts it's a requirement. So we need to decide who that's going to be, but I have to consult with governors in doing that. The proposal I want to put to George's board members is that we ask Anne if she would take it on again. Some of you will remember that she always was the SID for George's until such time as she became a NED here as well, and the governors felt they should have a George's only person. That's going to become increasingly impossible as we become more and more twin-hatted. So I would like the support of the board, of the George's board, so that I can say to the governors at their next meeting that we would like Anne to be the SID and get their support for that. And then formally we will have to come back here and sign it off. So I'm sorry it's a bit of a performance, but I hope everybody is happy with that. Anne's very kindly agreed to step back into the breach. The worst bit she's got to do is appraise me, so I need it sorting before the appraisal round, which is not that far away actually. So thank you, colleagues. So that takes us to item 1.5 and the Group Chief Executive's report. Jacqueline.
Good morning, everybody, and again, Happy New Year to everybody. I won't go through the Chief Exec's report in any great detail, because I think it's better that you ask questions rather than read the reams of it. Just a few bits I want to pull out. I suppose the first thing really is just to mark the fact that we went through a 7-day strike action of junior doctors over last week, which finished beginning of this week. And I have to say, I thought both organisations, all bits of the organisation, maybe I should say, did brilliantly well. And I think there's a bit of learning that we can all do with in regards to what did we learn that we can keep going even when there isn't a doctor's strike, because there are some things that actually systems that work better than actually when there's the junior doctors are around, that we need to try and embed in the whole of the organisation. But thank you to everybody who did, and I'm going to call out especially the consultants actually, Gillian, because I think they put their heart and soul into making sure our patients were safe and the organisations were safe. And I think they felt it by the end of the week. Doing a week of that, I think they're probably, well, I'm not probably, I know they are pretty tired. So a particular thank you to them. I went out and about over Christmas and New Year, and I have to say it was pretty, people were pretty buoyed up actually. There was actually a really good, and Richard and Anna came with me, and then we had various other people on whichever site. So I went here and I went to St George's, and we heard some great stories actually, personal stories from some of our staff about how they got to the roles they've been in, and I think we might incorporate that in some of our internal comms as we go forward, or how we highlight different wards, departments and areas in each trust with somebody who's got a great story to tell of one of the staff. So it was a great couple of days, and thank you to Richard and Anna who came round with me, as well as Becky and Teresa who came round with me at St Helier. I really enjoyed doing that. We are seeing an increase in COVID and flu, and we're seeing increases in our hospitals with that as well. And it is out and about in the community, as Gillian mentioned with one of our colleagues.
We've got our own example of it, haven't we, this morning?
We did. I just want to give a shout out to Genomics. You probably don't know that I chair the sort of transformational side of Genomics for South London and the South East. And it's been a really exciting journey to go on about how Genomics can actually, it will actually change how we treat people in the future, and is already doing that. If you think about CAR T therapy in cancer patients, that's all about how we design treatments based on the genome sequence to get the best result. So and that will be wider and wider than cancer as we go forward, and like cardiovascular disease. And we have Francis Elmsley, who's the head of genetics at St George's and also is a clinical director in the GMSA, is doing a roadshow. And if anybody wants to come and have a look at that, because I think it would be really helpful as a board as well, Gillian, that we have a look about what the future is going to look like and how we also make sure that we move ourselves into that way. I just want to say well done to Teresa, who's been appointed as the site CNO for this site. It's really good news. We've had some great achievement awards across the group as well. And I'm just whilst there are a few in there, I'm just going to pull out Tahara Butt, who's our finance director for Swelliot, who got a National Finance Award for the work that she does in equality, diversity and inclusion. That was well done. So thank you very much, Gillian.
Thank you, Jacqueline. I wonder if we could get Frances to come and talk to a board, because I certainly can't do the, she's doing the grand round, isn't she?
She is, yeah.
I can't do it. I'm not around that day.
Well, she's offered quite a few times, so
well,
she's retiring relatively soon.
I
So
think we should get her in, actually, Stephen, because, as you say, Jacqueline, it'll focus us on some of the longer term and opportunities for health, and we spend so much time dealing with today's problems. So do you think we can build that in?
I'm actually speaking to her straight after the board meeting about
Brilliant.
when she might come.
Oh,
yeah.
great minds think alike. Well, isn't that encouraging? Thank you, Stephen. Great. Okay, questions for Jacqueline. Aruna.
Just to firstly say well done really on the junior doctor strike, and to particularly thank our consultants for stepping up. But did we have to ask for any derogations is my question. None.
Absolutely not. We were very clear that if we thought we'd have to derogate, that we had a process, and we put a process in line that meant that either myself or James, along with the managing director, had to sign it off, and we had to test it, because it didn't seem to be helpful not to do that before going through absolute testing, every bit of it, before we thought we needed to derogate. But absolutely, no, we didn't.
Thank you, and that's commendable. That's fantastic.
Do you want to come in specifically on this, Richard?
Yeah, specifically on the strikes, I think Jacqueline's absolutely right to highlight the consultant contribution to that. I mean, they worked and worked and worked, and it was spectacular. But I just wanted to say we couldn't have got through it without our pharmacy colleagues and our allied health professionals and our nurses. And everybody went the extra mile, and I could feel that on the acute medicine ward where I did it. Shift.
Phil's indicated, before I bring him in, I just want to make the point, Jacqueline alluded to it, the performance, particularly in George's, I mean, it was good everywhere, but in George's it was outstanding, the ED performance, and it is about how we capture the lessons without expecting everything to be consultant-led, which is obviously not possible. But it was terribly striking, and then this week I see George's is back in the 70s, having been up in the 80s. So.
But not with as many patients waiting in ED. The patients waiting in ED are really a lot lower. So there's something there, but there's still more to do.
Yeah, we need to understand it better. Phil?
Just to sort of build on that point, Gillian, certainly in other places, to learn from crises is really difficult. So at the airport at Heathrow, we used to have regular crises, and we used to actually perform better in a crisis than we did when we weren't in crisis. And we spent a lot of time trying to think about how we get that into normal business. So I suspect there is research that's been done on this, so it probably is worth just looking a little wider than ourselves as we do this, and I think there's lots of industries that try this and find it quite difficult, actually. The other point I was going to make was we're obviously hitting winter, and it slightly surprises me how few people take up the flu and COVID vaccinations, and I'm actually delighted to have them, to be honest, and I think they're keeping me fit, and I just wonder if there's anything more strategic we can do to try and encourage more of our colleagues to step forward.
Well, I'll start, and then I might pass to Arlene, because she leads on the vaccination programme. So I know that both of our organisations pre-COVID actually really pushed the flu vaccine, and I can't remember how far we got here, but it was pretty good. And at George's we were at 90% of our staff had it. But post-COVID, when I think people have become more aware of vaccines, and there was the anti-vaccine lobby, and it sort of, I think, put some doubt in people's minds. So we do try and be really flexible about how we vaccinate people. We really try and give them chapter and verse about how the benefits of having it. But I don't know what else. I don't know what we got to this year, Arlene, actually.
Not good enough.
And I don't know what else you think we might need to do going forward.
So this year we are quite low. I think both trusts are below 50%. Nationally, or certainly in London, that is the picture. And you know, at one point, Epsom St Helier certainly was ahead of everybody else, even with those low numbers. I think the issue is definitely the whole COVID, and for healthcare workers, I think this is part of the legacy of VCOD, where we had all of that, where you couldn't work if you weren't vaccinated, and I think it just has put people off. So it's going to take some time to rebuild that confidence. The staff group that are seeking vaccination are largely our therapists. Unfortunately, nursing staff not so much, and medical staff either. So I think this is a legacy of VCOD. I think we will continue to do the work. Comms has done some great stuff around, some great comms around having your flu vaccination, certainly, and it caused quite a furor because of one post in particular, but it did see an increase in the people who came for vaccination. So we will continue to do that, but I definitely think this is a legacy of that VCOD process.
Thank you, Arlene. Peter.
Thank you. Two quick points. One, I mean, it's good to hear about the way in which the consultants stepped up, but presumably it still leaves many of the junior doctors feeling frustrated, keen to do the job, but nonetheless feel strongly about what they're undertaking. I mean, how are you managing that frustration, and are there risks to kind of teamwork in terms of consultants and junior doctors working together to achieve the best possible outcomes? Okay, and then the second point is really, Jacqueline, looking ahead, 2024, what's your New Year's wish? What one area would you most like to see progressing over this next year?
So I think what the tack we've taken is to give our junior doctors support to do what, you know, if they feel they want to strike, to support them doing that. If they feel they want to stay and work, to support them doing that. And we've been very clear not to get in the middle of this disagreement between the BMA and the government. And I suppose I sit here still in that place, and I think as a chief executive has very little influence on this other than to give to support and support to try and find a resolution. That's, I think, the best that we can do, because I really don't, you know, the junior doctors that are with us now are going to be the consultants that we bring in, that we have in the next five or 6 years. And I really don't want them to think that hospital management, who as a consultant you need to work with us, actually are there to be feared or undermine. And I suppose that's the way that we have chosen to deal with it. And I think you'll find most chief execs and their executive teams are doing the same thing. I do hope we can bring it to a resolution, the government can bring it to a resolution, mainly because actually the waiting times are going to take years to clear. And that whilst we continue to do our best and continue to be one of the best performing sectors in the country, it still is going to take a lot to clear those waiting lists down and get people treated in what is an incredibly confined financial place. So I suppose that's my answer to the first one, which might be a bit anodyne, but I think that is generally and genuinely how we have approached this. I suppose my wish, and I sent something out, which I did get some response from staff from actually this week about you know, my real wish would be to give some hope to staff that things are going to get better. If there was one thing that consolidated all the bits about improving flow, about people feeling that they can work in a supportive and caring environment, that we start to meet all our strategic things we want to do, we've got to find a way to give our staff hope, because at the minute they still think the light at the end of the tunnel is probably a train, and it probably is. So we've got to find ways of actually supporting to get to a different place, and that's going to be even more difficult next year because financially it's going to be a lot tougher. But I think that would be my one hope, that we could find a way of doing that, because if our staff are feeling that they've got hope and they feel that they're supported and they can do their job, then our patients get a better deal.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Richard, I wondered if you wanted to add anything about the doctors. But Peter made the point about teamwork, and certainly I've been really worried about whether it will have adversely affected teamwork. I don't think we've seen any evidence of that, have we?
I don't think that we have. I think that the doctors very much want to support each other. I think you can't underestimate how stressful it is for junior doctors, whatever choices they make in times of industrial action, wondering whether they should work or whether they should take action. And I know lots of them have found that very difficult. So I think we have to be very sensitive to that and support them through what must be a really hard time for them. And I think also a lot of doctors worry about the future of the NHS balanced against the amount of harm that the strikes will actually be doing. And we know that we can run hospitals safely, as we were saying, through periods of strike, but at the expense of planned care. And even though we keep going with the planned care that we can keep going with, and we do it better and better every time, the unseen harm that we can't yet measure, which is happening across the country. I have no doubt it's happening across the country. I think all the doctors worry about that, and they worry about where the moral balance lies. So I think it's a very hard time for them. And as Jacqueline says, the sooner it's settled, the better.
Oh, indeed. I think we're all absolutely in that place. Okay, thank you for that. I can't see any other hands, so on the back of that rich discussion, we're asked to note Jacqueline's report. Yeah, thank you. So that takes us on to item 2.1 and the Quality Committee's in common report. Is this you, Andrew?
Yes, it's me, because the meeting we had was in November when Aruna was away, and we didn't meet in December. So you got the final report yesterday, so you may not have had time, everyone might not have had time to fully digest it. However, there were 3 key areas that we wanted to pull out, which was health inequalities, maternity services, and patients with mental health concerns attending ED. I think before I just talk about those areas, I would say, I guess particularly following the board development session, we've been reflecting on how we do quality committee, and I think we recognise there's a risk that you see an awful lot of information and become a bit desensitised to it. So we want to change the approach to really make sure that we focus on specific areas in the meeting and dive down and really look at specific things with the right lens. And so probably doing less, but doing doing things better is the way we're trying to pivot the way the committee works. And part of that is thinking about whether we start to alternate. So 1 month look at all the formal reports, the next month have a less formal approach, potentially not with the full membership of or all the attendees that we normally get at committee, but that ends up being a more strategic discussion and things that the executive team are actually worried about, we give some airtime to and discuss that in a different way rather than just looking at reports. So that's where we'd like to go with quality committee, and we think that'll be more effective. But just talking about what came from the November meeting, firstly was a report on health inequalities and what we want to do as a group on health inequalities, and it was a really thoughtful piece actually, and the 3 key areas that we thought needed to be focused on were improving the quality of data. So this ties in with the national guidance on work on health inequalities as well, which is you have to get the data right to understand what's going on, to be able to take the right action and measure improvement. So that's a key step that we committed to doing. The next was focusing on 1 or 2 key priority areas in planned care. So picking a couple of areas where we thought we could get traction and really trying to demonstrate that we could understand the impact of health inequalities on particular services and make a difference to that. And then the third area was looking at high intensity users in ED, where we know that health inequalities is a factor. So we thought if we did a smaller number of things really well, that would be helpful rather than trying to boil the ocean. And that was what the report set out, and there was real support for that on the committee. We had a really good discussion about the issue of health inequalities and what was within our gift as a trust, and where there was a role for system partners in dealing with the issue of health inequalities as well. But we thought it was really important we did our bit, and everything that was within our control we took responsibility for. The other general theme was all the other bits of work that are going on, we need to make sure we ask the right questions about health inequalities. So I think that sums up the discussion we had on that particular issue. We had quite a discussion on maternity services. Now there's a maternity report on the agenda today, and I think we'll have more discussion about maternity then. I'd say one of the key areas of focus was perinatal mortality. So we've looked previously at the Embrace report from 2020, and we know we've got an external review that's been going on. That's due to report back in February. We also asked for an external review of the 2021 data because although that looked better in terms of where we sit nationally, there were still some areas of concern, so we want to get an external report on that. The other thing we talked about was just how well we've got a grip on the real-time mortality data. And I still think there's a little bit more work to do for us to really understand where we are year to date and how that compares with previous years. So it's an area of focus for us that we'll come back to that in future quality committee meetings. The third area to pull out is patients attending ED with mental health concerns. So we had quite a big discussion on that. The details are in the paper, but it's something we continue to focus on at Quality Committee. We think it's really important. We know it's a system problem, not just a George's and Epsom St Helier problem, but we're doing all we can from our perspective to try and make sure we look after those patients and the impact it has on other patients and staff in the department. I think the two other things that aren't in the front sheet that I'd like to pull out are never events and the head and neck review. The head and neck review is on the private agenda, so I won't go into that. You've got a summary in this paper, but we'll have more discussion then. And then on never events, I think it's worth saying we have particularly focused on those. We had a report at the November meeting on never events and the trends over the last few years. What you can see is there's a trend around wrong site procedures. Now, what we saw earlier in the year was wrong site procedures in terms of spinal injections. Following the work that was done to deep dive into that and the intervention, we haven't seen any more. So that was encouraging to think that the action that's being taken is making a difference to those sort of never events. We've seen a cluster of never events around wrong site in dermatology, and that is being looked at, and some action has already been taken. And then there were a few never events around retained products within patients where they'd had surgery. And again, we're going to continue to monitor that and make sure we see the improvement that we need to see. I think that's probably all to say, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Andrew. And Anne has already indicated. And then Tim.
Thank you, Gillian and Andrew. So I really welcome the focus of the committee on health inequalities, because I do think that's really important. And I guess I would ask you to consider whether that might also include physical health outcomes for patients who also have a mental health condition, because all the evidence is that the outcomes are a lot worse and people can be a decade of life. And I would consider that also to be a health inequality, and whether there's an opportunity to do that as part of that. I'd certainly happy to join some sort of conversation around that.
Andrew, do you mind if I take all the comments, and then otherwise we could end up being here for a very long time, and we've got a lot on the agenda. Thank you, Anne. Tim?
Excuse me, yes, thank you. Just a couple of points on health inequalities. The improving data set quality, you made some comment there generally about the need to do so, and I just wondered what that actually means in practical terms. Is that an internal initiative, if you like, to gather different data or to put tooling in place, or is this actually something where we're leaning on a sort of national drive here? I'm conscious of the NHS drive on Palantir and sort of wider sort of data sets. I just wonder whether we're engaged with that or doing something locally. And the second thought, perhaps it's more of a comment than anything else, was on the dealing with mental health in ED. I mean, it's sort of the wider system is under huge pressure, and it's sort of disappointing to see that the police are sort of backing off their sort of level of support that they will provide. I just wondered where our relationship with the Met Police was at our sites, and whether there's anything more that we can do to enhance the understanding, if you like, so that we get the response when we need it.
Thank you, Tim. Anybody else want to speak at this stage? Right, go to you, Andrew. You might want some support from execs.
So let me have a stab at the data question. Then I'll probably go to Richard on mental health and physical outcomes. Richard, about where you think that sits within the priorities that have been set, and then the relationship with the Met. I will look for someone else to answer.
James Blythe's just said to me that he'd like
Okay.
Okay, right.
So good question on data. I mean, to some extent, Tim, we had the discussion about, first of all, make use of what we've got. I think one of the key things, though, is capturing the data. So things like recording ethnicity and other factors that play into health inequalities, we need to make sure that we're consistently capturing that data and then paying attention to it. There is data that exists within the system. So there's data what was the CSU, so now sitting within the ICB hold, which we could look at and make use of. And the more we all collectively feed good quality data into the system tool, the better view we'll have of what's going on. But we also had a discussion around the difference between data in terms of the hard data we're capturing on the computer and data in terms of the sort of the information we get from proactively engaging with particular groups of patients who have particular needs. And we talked about using that kind of broader concept of information to inform the work we're doing, not just the computer data set. So working collectively together to capture better data, and I guess it's a big ask, but that's why the focus on particular cohorts, for example, picking 2 outpatient specialties where we could really look at that and do that effectively would help take us forward. The other, shall I come to you, Richard, you might want to build on that, and particularly perhaps if you could answer Anne's question.
Yeah, thank you. So on mental health, I think there are some things that we can definitely do and some things that we have already started doing. So one of them is to make sure that we offer smooth and good care and navigation type specialist support to mental health colleagues working in mental health trusts. And we've done some work with Billy Boland, as you know, Anne, on that. And I think that's something that we can carry on building. And we shouldn't take our eye off that. Another thing I think is to remember that, and I think this overlaps with the priority of looking at high-intensity service users, that there is opportunity for us to help people with healthy lifestyles using a every contact counts approach with things like smoking cessation. And I think there's more that we can build around there. And I think maybe the third thing is being as conscious and thoughtful as we possibly can about the way that we deliver long-term condition care to people with mental health issues. And I don't think one should conflate learning disability, autism and mental health. But if we think about those things as a group, the Oliver McGowan mandatory training is very powerful in that regard and really does make one think about what reasonable adjustments look like and what understanding looks like. And I think that if we roll that out effectively, we'll see the benefits of that. And I think that's probably the third big aspect.
Thank you, Richard. James?
On the point around the liaison with the Metropolitan Police and actually for Epsom with Surrey Police as well, actually, around mental health. I mean, we haven't, since the implementation of the Right Care, Right Person framework, we haven't quite possibly seen the operational impact that we expected to see. It might be that we just haven't had some of the things happen that, are particular triggers under it, for example, around patients going AWOL. One of my reflections in terms of one of the things that I'm quite keen for us to work on over the next year is I think there's more need for a closer interface between individual trusts and the local borough police command. And actually, I don't know who to go to in the Met at the moment. We've had, sadly, a particularly bad incidents of violence and aggression towards staff in St Helier ED just before Christmas. And we're very keen to push for prosecution off the back of that. And actually knowing who in the Met to liaise with at a senior level is quite difficult. I think that it's done quite well across London by the NHS, but I think it's harder at a more local level. So I do think as our CRP evolves and as some of the challenges around mental health and violence and aggression towards staff evolve, I think it's something that we do need to continue to work on.
I had a recent incident where a senior police officer rang me at a weekend because, this is to illustrate your point about links, because they needed some out-of-hours access to part of George's and they didn't know who to go to. And because I used to work with him years ago, he rang me up. Now, Stephen was on call and we sorted it, but I'd made the point to the senior police person concerned that it was a very odd way of doing business. And so I think, James, there's probably something in it for us to take that forward, more formally, actually. Thank you. So Kate and then Yin.
Well, I was going to make a comment in respect to St George's, and Andrew may well want to comment as well, because we very much work with our estates and facilities colleagues around links with the Metropolitan Police, and actually I think we have pretty good links, and we know who our links are. So, but disappointingly, the Met Police are a bit like the NHS sometimes. They're not as organised and they don't follow their processes. So. As one would like them to be. So we have actually made some progress even further more recently about potentially having on-site liaison, which we've been working up through contacting the Met Police, who's really keen to progress this and has got a little bit stuck with it, but it's just unlocked a little bit more. So we're hopeful we're going to be able to have much more on-site presence, which I think is really reassuring for staff to back up the security team as well. So I feel our relationships are pretty good at the St George's end. We know in the main who our liaison. We've got Operational Cavell as well, which is additional support. But of course, they do. People do change over, so it's knowing who's available at any one time and those messages getting through in the right way. But Andrew, you may want to comment.
No, I agree, Kate. I think since we signed the Cavell letter, I think in terms of our staff feeling better supported by the Met, and that the Met being much more transparent on prosecutions and actions that they are taking, it has been better. We've been struggling as well, James, to get, because we have behind the scenes been trying to get a Cavell letter sorted out here. So I don't know what it is that's stopping us here, but I will take that one away and just see what more I can do to push.
I mean, if necessary, Jacqueline can talk to the... so they're in different commands, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I've got a relationship with the lady, if it's still her. But
yeah, well, they move around very fast.
Commander, yes.
Yeah, they move around very fast. And now they no longer have borough commanders. Things are much more difficult than they used to be. Anyway, let's take that offline. But important discussion.
They probably say the same about us. Keep organising yourself.
I'm sure they do. Yin.
I was just going to respond to what you said about not knowing who to contact. I know that the borough structure is still the sort of best port of call, and if they don't know who it is, then they'll be able to direct you. And also the website. I know, I'm sorry if it's teaching grammar and suck eggs, but sometimes the best way to sort of contact anyone is to go through the sort of general line, because they are under duty to always respond to you. So just a suggestion. Thank you.
Yin, we'll take it offline. It's clear that it needs a bit of work, and as you say, Jacqueline, I'm sure they feel the same way about us. Right, I think we've dealt with the questions. I can't see any other hands, so we're asked to note the report from the Qualities Committee in common. And so I can't see any disagreement with that, happily. That takes us on to 2.2 and the Finance Committees in common, and that's you, Anne.
Thank you. As with others, I'll take the report as read. I guess the things I would highlight, certainly on the money, is that when we looked at the month 8 numbers, because the system has been given additional funding that has flowed through to particularly St George's, we now believe that we can, well, at ESDH we can deliver our plan, and at George's we can deliver our forecast, which has improved because we've been given additional funding. So we feel like that's in a reasonable place. Having said that, we were asked to assume there would be no further industrial action in putting those figures together, and of course there has been further industrial action, so there will be an issue about whether or not we are compensated for that. In achieving our forecast, however, we are using a lot more non-recurrent savings plans than we originally intended to, or indeed is desirable, and that does have implications for next year, because I think the South West London was encouraged in being allowed to have a deficit plan. The intention was that it would then break even in the second year. Those conversations are yet to be had, but the starting point, which we're not yet at liberty to talk about publicly, is not a great place. So there'll be quite a lot of work to do to come up with a deliverable plan, and I think it will be important for the board to feel that it's got a plan that it can stand behind when we get into next year. And we will talk a little bit more, Andrew will talk a little bit more about more details of the finance in the finance report later on the agenda. On the performance side, I mean, there is actually some really strong performance, and we should celebrate that sort of diagnostics. I think is in a good place. So there's some work to do at St George's on cancer, but I think it's an improving journey. I guess the bit that we as a committee wanted to highlight was the requirement now for ambulance handovers within 45 minutes. That's actually less in London than it is elsewhere, which I think is 15 minutes. But I think we were concerned that in handing over at 45 minutes, that would require some practices around cohorting patients, and that there were some, I wouldn't say concerns, but we needed to pay attention to the safety of patients who were being handed over from ambulance staff before we could admit them properly into accident and emergency. So I think those were the two things that I would highlight.
Thank you very much, Anne. Questions or comments from colleagues? Andrew.
Yeah, just to pick up on the last point you made, and that was one thing that jumped out at me from the report, and I just wonder what we are doing and what the safety risk actually is. So what are the next steps?
I was going to say, I think that's probably an operational...
Well, I'm sure that, if I can say, I have asked Arlene to actually, via the site chief nurses, to actually have a look at and make sure we are giving all of that we're doing regular rounding, that we're actually making sure people are actually an audit trail for that. The trick for me is not asking our ED staff to fill out loads more stuff, which is where it was going last week. But it is absolutely on everyone's agenda about how we make sure that the patient's in there. I think what Richard said though is at the bit about we don't quite know. We do know the mortality rate has gone up, and there is yet, I think they're presuming it's a link with long waits in ED, and we do know there is evidence of that, but I'd have to say I think it might not be physical harm you can see immediately, but there might be harm that we can't yet, that it's only currently becoming obvious, that might not be about the level of nursing care you get, but the fact they've not accessed medical care as quickly as possible. But I don't know, I'm presuming that rather than, so I'll let the site people talk.
Is it too early for us to have that discussion, or James, did you and Kate want to say something about it? I mean, I don't want you to indulge in conjecture if we need harder data and more time to reflect on it. We've logged the fact that it's a potential worry. We've all had those worries. They're crystallising, I think, is what I would say. But James, did you want to come in?
Yes, I mean, I think that it's very variable. It goes up and down, but I think there is definitely cause for concern in that, you know, if we have a flow into the emergency department but we have no flow out, that compresses a larger and larger number of acutely unwell people into, you know, a relatively small space. There is work that we have done in terms of increasing the staffing, and we work really closely with the London Ambulance Service in terms of who looks after which patients, because there are certain situations under which they also have an agreement to cohort, i.e. clinically look after some patients as well. But, you know, if you take St Helier ED, there is a very literally concrete concern, which is that there are not good lines of sight through the department. So actually the clinical oversight and supervision of some patients in the department becomes a real concern, and we do see that playing through. I think that there are two areas of focus in mitigating it. I think the first is, where do we hold patients and in what order within the department, and how do we staff them? The second is a conversation that is continuing with the whole leadership community around the St Helier site next week, which is about that balance of risk between ED and the wards, and how, you know, what are our triggers in terms of the state of the emergency department to do something different in terms of rebalancing risks throughout the whole organisation. But there are no easy answers with that conversation, because we are moving risk then through the rest of the organisation, and so that needs to be a whole leadership leadership community discussion, because it's not something we can just sort of sort for the ED in isolation, and it's something where on a particular day we need to give colleagues the framework to make quite quick decisions in order to sort of mitigate the safety risks as best they possibly can.
Or federate the risk, I suppose.
Federate the risk is probably the best way of describing it. So it is something where it's a very live issue for us at the moment, Andrew, and something that's got a lot of ongoing work.
And of all the EDs, I think it's most dramatic in St Helier because of the physical constraints, which are enormous, and the number of sometimes very sick people that we have. Richard, on this, and then I'll ask Kate if she wants to come in. And I think I saw Yin's hand, but oh, maybe it was Aruna's, was it? Yeah, okay. So Richard, Kate, Aruna.
And there's a much cited research paper which I think has been broadly supported by other pieces of work since that suggests that for every 83 patients who wait in ED for 6 hours to 8 hours too long, there's an excess death. And I think that although we know that we can't work out which people have suffered those excess deaths, there's an association rather than a direct identifiable link, as we know through the work we've done with our shimmy at ESTH. Even though we can't demonstrate that, I think we should work on the assumption that a hospital in which patient flow doesn't work properly will be having harm and excess deaths nationally, not just us, but everywhere. And that just underlies the importance of trying to maintain patient flow.
I'll be very brief, Gillian, because really what James has described is very similar at St George's as well, and the issues and the way we're mitigating. I guess the handover and the cohorting has just created another level of moral injury for staff in ED. And we don't have, when we have people in corridors at St George's, down the back of the department and down the side, they're not very visible to the department either, even though it takes a bit longer to get to that point. So, yeah, I think it's created another level of stress and concern and worry. You know, probably the reasons are right for doing it, but it's piling more into the organisation and the staff in ED feeling concerned about that.
Yeah, and that's a kind of polite way of putting the stress and strains on our ED staff, about which we had a long discussion at the last meeting, and things have looked better over the last few weeks, but I think we all know it's just a constant struggle, isn't it? And for our staff, a constant struggle, really. And often for patients, awful, very sick people lying in a corridor on a bed. It's just not what any of us want. So I've got Yin and then Arlene. Sorry? What? I did know it was Aruna, but I wrote down Yin. My apologies. Aruna and then Arlene.
That's absolutely fine. We're sitting close to each other. So, I think a couple of things, really. Firstly, I think thank you, James, for articulating the difficulties and for me, really, the risk and the potential mitigation. And I guess what I would request that we actually document this so that we're all on the same page, perhaps, on our risk register in that way. And the second thing, which I think Richard did touch on, is let's not forget that we've been here with HMSR and Shimmy at ESTH and the lessons we've learned from there, and that we do then kind of look at it through that lens when we look at the situation we are in right now.
Thank you, Aruna. I mean, I do hope we've done that. Did you want to come?
Yes, I mean, what's been quite interesting, because because we had those elevated mortality indices for a long time, we did do quite a lot of work to look at them, and one of the things we specifically looked at was whether there was any in the cases any correlation between long stays in ED and deaths in the EDs, and actually in our specific case, from the evidence that we had, we couldn't actually see that correlation, and obviously we're now seeing some positive movement in terms of those mortality indices, but I think the evidence, the paper that Richard cites, is really clear, so it's something that we need to continue to focus on, because, and make sure that we're capturing it and keeping that scrutiny there, but in the specific case of what was driving our indices for a while, we looked for it and we never found it.
That's what I was alluding to, really. Our quality committee, I think, is totally on top of this, but needs to remain on top of it, Andrew. But I know you will be. There's a risk that the board has the same discussion every meeting. And it's an important issue we mustn't lose sight of, but the hard lift on this needs to be done at Quality Committee, I think. Right, Arlene, you've been very patient there.
No, I just wanted to come in to say that we have started the work to look at the quality of care being delivered in the EDs while we have all of the problems. But Steph has had done some work on that in the last week, and I wondered if Steph could be given the opportunity to update.
Steph, do you want to stand up or borrow a microphone or whatever?
Hi everyone. Yes, we've started that work. Arlene's briefed us around the quality and the aspects, because we've got patients in ED for prolonged periods of time. They're being bedded down. They need all their ADLs. They need food, you know, everything like that. And in EDs you wouldn't have hot food normally, and staffing and quality rounds. So what we've done is we've amended the accreditation that we have in place in both trusts to look at what's in place, what paperwork do we use, because the paperwork will be different, because we have to do assessments on patients to make sure they don't come to harm, like pressure ulcers, falls, you know, everything like that. So we've done that. We've made that module. It's been already done in St George's. We've done 3 so far, 2 in Epsom St Heliers. That information's coming and will be reviewed by Arlene next week, so she can bring it to Jem. And also, as part of our weekend work, and we have heads of nurses and matrons in. So as per Arlene, it's having discussions with the site chief nurses to discuss that further. But this is our expectation every weekend too. These quality rounds happen, and I think Kate and James are in agreement also. So lots of work have happened, lots of work to do. It's not the ideal place for patients to be there for prolonged periods of time. Their sleep is affected. You know, drug rounds need to happen. We need teams there, therapy teams more so lots more work to do, because this isn't going away. So from a quality perspective, we've done the ask as Arlene's asked us.
Thank you, Steph. That's really helpful. I know we've had some learning in George's from a particular complaint, and the complainant worked with us actually to help us get some of the learning there. Right, okay, so that was all on the back of the Finance Committee report. But I hope you're willing to note that report. A lot in it. Let's move swiftly on, because we're losing time, and we've still got some way to go. So item 2.3 is the People Committee in Common Report. Yin.
Thank you, Gillian.
Was it meant to be you, or was it meant to be?
No, it was meant to be Martin, but that's fine. I'll speak to the item. So my summary is very brief. I wanted to talk about the key issues to escalate to the board, as well as the wider issues on which the People Committee received assurance. So the People Committee met on the 24th of November. There was no meeting in December. So the 2 key items are the RES and DES quality data update. There have been some good news. So the disciplinary cases have reduced, but that's only in terms of members of staff from a white background. And there has been an uptake of apprenticeship, and that's improved. Unfortunately, both St George's and Epsom St Helier boards are outliers in terms of underrepresentation of members of the community from the black and minority ethnic. Clearly, the board at the board development day in December recognised that it was important for the boards to be more sort of diverse, having regard to the proportion of BAME members of staff across both trusts. And you will recall that at our December board development day, we reviewed the action plans and agreed a prioritised work plan, and that is being developed by the centre, which is being led by John Head. We also discussed about the NHSE EDI plan compliance. We reviewed the 6 high impact actions published in June 2023. I mean, some of the measures are already integrated into the wider culture program. So, for example, the talent management programs, the shadow board programs, which will harness sort of a constant talent pipeline. And all the NEDs already have EDI objectives, But I think what the people committees in common wanted to see was proper timescales for actions to be tracked against the national readiness for delivery. So moving on now quickly to the wider issues on which the People Committee received assurance. Happy to say that we received reasonable assurance from the following items. First is about the program board, which is the culture, equality, and diversity and inclusion. We heard about the gesh 100 Senior Leadership Forum as well. We also heard about the Freedom to Speak Up reports. There is this Raising Concerns, Triangulation and Oversight Group. And the purpose is to unblock outstanding concerns. There is also a new case management approach, which I haven't actually heard about in terms of the updates since then, but it all sounds really, really promising. We also heard about the autumn vaccination campaign. We did touch on the staff survey response rate. I think it was quite disappointing. It was, I think, in the 30s for St. George's and 47%, I think, for Epsom and St. Helier. So the People Committees in Common will be discussing the staff survey at length next Friday when we meet. So that's all I propose to say at the moment. You can see from the diligent report other things that we discussed about the industrial action, and then I think it's called the NHS Violence Prevention Reduction Standard, the VPRS, and our compliance rate has increased from 35% to 47%, which is good news. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Yin. As you say, there was a lot there, but there's focus on things that as a board, I know we've been very concerned about making the right progress in relation to equalities and diversity. Any questions or comments from colleagues? We did have the advantage, as you said, Yin, of a very full discussion at our December board development. So I suspect that means that we can note this report and move on. Yeah, see lots of nods. Thank you, colleagues. So that takes us to the Infrastructure Committees in Common report. Anne.
Thank you, Gillian. So we had our second meeting of the Infrastructure Committee on the 12th of December, which covers IT and estates and facilities and so on. So we had quite a broad discussion around IT, and there are parts in the paper about the development of digital strategy and so on. We had a discussion about the EPR, which we referenced in the board visits, but I think we need to have because of the commercial nature of that, we need to have a conversation in Part B about that. But the picture archiving communication system and radiology information system, we talked about, and that is reported here. And I think partly because as we develop systems that involve more than one trust, the kind of choreography of it becomes really quite complicated, doesn't it? So in this case, there are some issues with the first trust to go live, which is Croydon, which has caused some delay. But then working out when that then goes live at other trusts is quite a complicated thing to achieve, because you can't obviously implement this at a time when you're implementing a new EPR, for example. So we were, there's not much more that the committee can do on that. We sort of noted the issues and the progress, and that's something we'll need to keep a watching brief on. The other two things that we talked about were obviously around estates and facilities. And we've kind of been at this a bit longer, I think, at George's. So we felt in a better place in that we, having had a process of extra meetings for a year or two ago, we've now got into a rhythm of authorised engineer reports and so on. So we felt like we were, that's not to say that the infrastructure is great, but we felt like we sort of were in control and we knew what the issues were. Which felt to be in a better place. We're slightly newer at it at Epsom and St Helier, and obviously, you know, from the visits today, we've seen some of the infrastructure at St Helier, which is in a more difficult place. and as we await sort of developments on the new hospital, it all becomes a bit complicated. We felt, therefore, that we only really had limited assurance around Epsom and St Helier. Some of that is because of where we are and the difficulties that we've got. Some of that, and this is to do with some of the lack of some of the authorised engineer reports, which are behind where they ought to be. And we will be focusing on that to make sure that those authorised engineer reports happened. Andrew could talk more about it, but we are developing the premises assurance model at ESDH. It's already there at George's. And some of the issue is not that things aren't being done, it's that we haven't got the evidence to when we go to audit, we haven't got the evidence to support the fact that they've been done. And obviously that's, we need to be able to evidence it, otherwise we can't be clear, we can't be assured as a board that it's happened. And then the final thing to highlight is really around two serious health and safety incidents which involved contractors, I think kind of working at height. So there's an issue about, and that made us, I guess, raise two issues for us as a committee. One was, how could we be assured that we were carrying out our responsibilities properly for contractors working on our sites? And we've asked for some more work to be done on that, to come back to the next committee. The other is that, looking at the surprise on people's faces, was did people know that had happened? And the committee didn't know. So we asked a second question, again, haven't quite got the answer yet, about how does the board get notified of these things, because they are significant incidents that I think the board should know. So kind of, it's a bit in limbo. I don't know whether Andrew's able to say more at this stage, but they were things that we just need to get better at and make sure that the governance and the reporting works better.
Thank you very much indeed, Anne. When I read this report, when it came out, it was the first I knew of it, and that was my immediate thought. Are these incidents that should be alerted to board very quickly, in the way that we've got quite established rules for most things? So, Andrew, can you help us on that?
Yes. The process that we have is that we have a permit to work system. So when we have contractors working on site, we approve their method statements and risk assessments. And I think on both of these incidents, it was contractors not following their own method statements. So we will provide some due diligence into that permit to work system that we do. I think in terms of resolving then the reporting up to the board, something Stephen and I are working through is so all of these have been covered by the Health and Safety Committee at George's. And what we're working through now is to make sure, and it probably, and we are doing it now through Infrastructure Committee, that the Health and Safety Committee has that direct line so that there is a clear reporting line that comes up to the board now for the Health and Safety Committee. So these things would normally get escalated through there.
Thank you, Andrew. I think my concern is whether there is a more immediate alerting of board members, which we do have in relation, for example, to safety incidents. Right, I've got lots of hands now. Jacqueline, Aruna, Stephen. Jacqueline.
I suppose as the person who gets in trouble for this, Andrew, and as the Chief Exec Responsible Officer, I can't wait till the board knows about it. I need to know before then.
So if this had been an employee, absolutely. However, we have different level of responsibilities when we have a contractor working on the site. So this is absolutely one that you or I are not going to prison together about. So I think there is a differentiation here between contractors on site who have a responsibility for health and safety and working to their own method statements. If this would have been an employee of ours, I would have been in your office within half an hour.
I still think it's probably safer just to tell me.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Let's take it offline. I did feel the same, Andrew, when I read the report. So we just need to make sure that we're all on the same page. So if Aruna and Stephen, your point was that we don't need to elaborate it. But if it's different, then please speak.
Slightly different in that we used to have, and I don't know whether you can piggyback off it, a process at ESTH for non-clinical incidents, and they used to come straight up to all of us. Arlene's nodding, so perhaps we could just resurrect that.
Okay, well that sounds to me like solving a problem we were in we agreed we would just take offline and get right. So Stephen, I need to hear from you now. But we may still need to take it offline, but
So we've already established a sort of criteria of things that we need to escalate to the board, and it works well in terms of clinical incidents. We can revisit it to make sure that we're explicitly covering that in it, but that the same process can cover this.
Yeah. And as Aruna says, it absolutely did at ESTH. So we'll just make sure we get that right. Lovely. Thank you, everybody. Any other questions or comments on this report? Tim?
Apologies, Chairman. A different sort of area, really. I think Anne made very clearly the point about the complexity and the need to choreograph. Yeah, the complexity and the need to choreograph some of the systems changes that we're making, and the conversation was particularly around PACS. I think for me, the watchword here is integration. So much of what we are trying to do here is around integrating some of these really quite large and complex systems, and I think that this choreography is only going to get more complex as we go forward. I guess where I pull a question out of this, and it might be a question that we want to take later in the meeting, so I know we're going to talk about the group strategy development and get an update on that, but mention is made in the report here of the digital strategy aiming for delivery in March, and I'm just wondering whether that, just reflecting that is quite an ambitious target, I think, given all the things that are in play at the moment in that IT space, and perhaps some of the wider questions that we want to see addressed in the strategy. I wonder whether there is a case for giving ourselves a little bit of breathing time in that choreography of all the elements of the group strategy, and thinking about pushing that perhaps a little bit further down the track.
It's a good question, Tim. Do you want to deal with it now, James and Andrew, or do you want to pick it up in the discussion later?
I think it may be helpful to discuss it later.
That was my instinct, but I didn't want to, if Tim's happy with that. Andrew, are you okay with that? Yeah, great stuff. Okay, can we note this report? I'm getting fidgety now because time's moving on and we've still got some way to go. So it's 22 midday and we're at item 3.1, which we should have got to 25 minutes ago. Just to focus everybody's minds. So Arlene, we're on the maternity services report.
Thank you, Julia.
Is that you? GD? Who's GD?
That was supposed to be Steph.
Oh, that was Steph, yeah. But
yes.
Of course you've come back early from holiday.
Thank you, Chair. So the maternity report, I will start by saying that we are in the process of reviewing the template that we use to present the report, given the feedback that we've had, and we have had several iterations of this report anyway, as we've sought to make it clearer, present the issues, but our CQC report at George's initially told us that we weren't looking at maybe the right things and all of that. We have had the maternity safety support program team in, and they have offered us a template, so this will be the last of you see this report in this form, but we will be still working to improve. So I just wanted to say that at the outset. The report seeks to provide update to the board on where we are against the national and local safety actions for maternity. We looked at one of the big issues that we have looked at was the Embrace review, which Andrew spoke about earlier in his report, which looks at perinatal mortality. We have that detailed review of the cases where it was highlighted that George's was outside or more than 5% of its pairs. That review is happening and the final report is due in February. We've asked for, as Andrew said, a review of the cases the following year. But just to provide some maybe reassurance. The report has, this current report has a detail of all of the perinatal mortality stillbirth cases that have been reviewed, any actions that have been identified, and a plan is developed and communication. So that will continue to come, and maybe as a separate appendix where we're able to demonstrate what the reviews are happening and what actions are taken as a result of those reviews. And we will be aiming to present the comparative data, looking at the number of stillbirths, the number of neonatal deaths in raw data form. What we do know is that Embrace do some adjustments to the data based on, and they're not very clear on what is based on, but we can certainly look at the raw numbers, and we're aiming to do that starting in our committee at the end of this month. The big, I suppose the big chunk of this report is on around CNST, and as we know, CNST is a system where we are challenged, as it were, to demonstrate compliance in 10 key safety actions in order to get a rebate of the insurance premiums that we pay. For both organizations, we've been working together with George's and FSMS and Helier together as we work through. Where we have got to with that is that we have, before Christmas, we had several meetings where we reviewed the evidence before it got submitted to the LMNS, who has final sign-off. We do it with the LMNS present and all together. We are able to declare compliance in 7 of the 10 key safety actions for CNST. The safety actions that we're not able to declare compliance with presently are Safety Action 5, which is around midwifery workforce planning, and that is because we are looking at the establishment reviews for both maternity units. You will know that both maternity units have had birth rate plus reviews, which recommended that they needed more midwives to deliver the service, and we have not. We were not able to do that because we needed to do other reviews certainly for FSMS and Helier to look at how we're using the midwives that we do have, and was there opportunity to release some of them, and that work has started in FSMS and Helier by reduction of continuity of carer teams, of which there were 10, and not all necessary. So we're doing some of that work which will release senior midwives, but we're also developed a proposal to employ staff nurses, scrub in theatres, because currently we have midwives scrubbing and we don't need midwives to scrub. So that's some of the work, and the proposal to add more midwives, to up the establishments. We are working that through because it will cost money to look at how we are able to do that. In order to declare compliance, we don't have to have it implemented, but we do need to have a plan. And so in the next 2 weeks, we need to work through the plan for both FSMS and Helier and St. George's as to how many midwives we need, how much it will cost, and is there anything else that we need to do. So in the next 2 weeks, we have to do that because we have to sign off the CNST declaration at the end of January. So Safety Action 5 is currently red. The other safety action that is amber is Saving Babies Care bundle, and that is because that is signed off by the LMNS even before we are able to declare anything. We have done a self-declaration, FSMS and Helier and George's, and that has been moderated by the LMNS, and the final review of that evidence is going to be done on Tuesday the 16th of January. So Saving Babies Care Lives have 7 elements and about 70 interventions that all need to be reviewed, and that is the teams are working on that. Both teams feel confident that we will be able to achieve the 70% that we need to do to achieve, and I don't have any reason to believe otherwise because I have looked at the evidence. All the rest of the safety actions, the teams have already declared compliance, and the LMNS have signed those off. So those are the only two that we need to work through. And that is all I wanted to say for this maternity report. I think we agreed that we would have an extraordinary meeting or some way to sign off the submission. So we will do that, but we can't do that until we've done the Finance Committee, where we've done the establishment review.
Timing is quite tight, isn't it?
Very tight.
And hopefully we'll be able to have a quick Teams
yes.
mechanism for doing that, because getting everyone together won't be easy. Okay, lots of hands I can see now. James, did you want to come in first?
Yeah, it's just to highlight the challenge with the CNST around the staffing is we will need to make a decision to invest in maternity staffing in 24-25 ahead of really quite early in a business planning process and ahead of being able to make other decisions as part of a fully integrated business plan for the year. And everyone will know how keen I am to have a fully integrated business plan where we look at our priorities, because resources are very tight. So that there is a good case to do it, which is that actually we get a rebate back on our CNST for investing in quality. But we just need to have real clarity that we're sort of making a decision out of sequence here because of the constraints of the CNST process, and I think that's why the sort of scrutiny and oversight on it's really important.
Thank you, James. I think we are clear. I don't like these kind of things because if too many of them come, out of, you don't have a business planning process, do you? I saw lots of hands. The first one was Jenny, then there was it you, Richard? Did you know? I thought, it's Peter. I knew there was somebody else. So Jenny, Peter, I saw Andrew. Right, okay. So Jenny, Peter, Andrew.
Thanks very much. Arlene, you have last year, and obviously this year, but a huge amount of effort into this over and above, but you also have a very wide remit elsewhere, and there's always the trade-offs between the amount of time that we're putting towards maternity services, and then you're talking about a number of dates. So as a board member, I think dedicating all this time, I think we should constantly review when we can translate things back into more business as usual. I take elements in relation to staffing, and also, is it achievable, the staffing, even if we go out for posts, given what a national issue this is? This has now been highlighted at such a level about recruitment levels. Everybody is in a similar position. So, first of all, congratulations and thank you for what you've done. Is there a point at which we can step back? And thirdly, are our staffing issues likely to be met realistically given the national situation?
I'm going to take all the comments, questions, Arlene, if that's okay. Peter?
Thanks. It's just around the workforce plan and the work on affordability. If it was concluded that notwithstanding the need, there was nonetheless not the money available to fund it, where would that leave it in relation to compliance or otherwise, and how would that be handled? Or presumably the alternative is, if it is to be funded, it may mean further savings have to be found elsewhere, which is not necessarily your challenge, Arlene, but maybe one for Andrew. And it's again, is that necessarily the conclusion if it were deemed affordable? Thank you.
Which is why I so dislike individual items being taken out of any proper process. But I think we all understand the national context around this. Andrew?
I just wanted to double check where we're at for my own understanding as well. So 3, the transitional care, I think I'm hearing we think we might achieve that. Number 5, though, the midwifery workforce planning, although we might have plans in place, because we've not demonstrated supernumerary status over the previous period, my understanding is, at least for George's, we can't achieve that. It's suggesting we might have scraped in for Epsom St Helier. But I think I'm hearing whatever we do, we can't achieve full compliance for George's. So there's a slight, one's red and one is sort of more amberish. And then the Saving Babies Lives bundle, number 6, I think you said we think we might be able to achieve compliance. So I just wanted to be clear what we're expecting to see at the end of January, really.
Thank you, Andrew. Right, Arlene, shall we go through this? Jenny's first.
Jenny's first. Is there a point that we can take this back to business as usual? Absolutely. I think we've had the George's CQC report, and now we've had the Epsom and Helier is imminent. And the plan is, Jenny, that we will recruit, and it is out for advert, into a director of midwifery for the group that will be able to focus on that, so then I can do other things. So absolutely, we are working to get this back to business as usual by getting somebody in that is able to totally focus on maternity. Is it achievable? If we had the funds and we were able to recruit, it is, because we don't have a problem recruiting midwives. We have a problem retaining midwives, more so in George's than in Epsom and Helier. But Epsom and Helier, at one point we had a waiting list, and there are always midwives wanting to come to Epsom and Helier. We have exactly the same, I think, as I say, for George's. It's just retention that's a problem, and that is work that we have to do for George's. Peter's question about if there was no funding, what happens is that we declare non-compliance with those safety actions, and our experience has been so if you're compliant in all 10 elements, you get the rebate. If you're not compliant, what you are given is the opportunity to put in a bid, maybe for some funding to do to improve your compliance in the area that you declared non-compliance in. What that means is, for us in Epsom and Helier, we got £500 or £1,000, for instance, towards transitional care, but it's a one-off sum and it's not recurrent. So that is why we're able to say if we are, we can set up transitional care if we fund it going forward. And for George's, we got the same. We got £300,000 for transitional care last year because we were not compliant. So you get some funding, but you don't get the full amount. So that's what happens. Andrew, transitional care, completely correct. As I've just said, we got some funding last year, so we have some seed funding, as it were, but we will need to look at how we plan that in recurrent, and that's the difference that we will need to look for. And we have plans, both sides have developed really great plans to do that in an incremental way. It'll just need the funding. The midwifery staffing, there are several elements of it, you're correct, and one of that is that you need to be compliant with 100% compliant with a supervisory midwife for every shift by a date that was cut off in October. George's is not compliant in that, but that's just a small bit of the wider work, but it means that overall George's will not be compliant, whatever we do. And the Saving Babies Care Live bundle, that is, as I said, 7 elements, 70 interventions. Both sides are confident, and I have seen the evidence that we will be able to, because in each of the 7 elements you have to achieve at least 50%. So the teams are confident that that will be able to work. For Epsom and Helier, in the supervisory midwife, they have been able to go back and review all of the incidents where midwives have said, I've not been supernumerary because I had to do sutures on a shift. And actually, if you do sutures on a shift and the rest of it you're supervisory, you are supervisory. So we have done that detailed work. I think that's all of the answers.
Well, I got through my list, Arlene, so well done, thank you. Were you wanting to come in, Jacqueline?
No.
Sorry, I thought you indicated. Right, are we able to, if we go to the action required by the board, note the compliance status and the key areas of risk and mitigations? I think we've got a few more months, Jenny, of detailed consideration of this before we will be able to take our foot off the accelerator and leave it much more to Quality Committee. People happy to endorse that? Thank you. Right, we're still behind. We do need to pick up speed. On to item 3.2, the Healthcare Associated Infection Report. Arlene.
Thank you, Gillian. So I will make this one short. Happy to take questions. Overall, the summary is that for C. diff, ESTH is above trajectory. For the C. diff number of cases, a comprehensive review has been undertaken of all of the cases. Multiple factors have come out, but nothing new that was discovered from that review, from the previous review that we had done earlier in the year. George's remains within the upper limit for C. diff in particular. A big issue for Epsom and Helier was that we found Legionella in Epsom. The board will remember that we had Legionella in St. Helier previously, but this was in Epsom now. There were queries around the standardization of sampling, and so there are some clear actions around what needs to happen for the sampling, and our authorized engineer is working with the estates team to ensure that we get that right. The only other issue was measles. We had a case of measles that came into St. George's ED, and we ended up having to swab about 10 contacts because this patient was not isolated. So the biggest learning really is about raising awareness of ensuring that patients are isolated if they have undiagnosed rashes in ED, because we had to swab staff as well. So it becomes quite a big issue if we don't isolate the patient promptly. And then I think the only other thing that I wanted to highlight is that we know that we moved niche over to Mary Seacole on the Epsom site, and we have noticed quite a number of issues, C. diff cases, norovirus. They've had lots of outbreaks, and so the infection control team is working with the teams there to improve, I think, training. It is a new environment for that team, and therefore we're looking at how infection control processes work. Those are the main issues. One thing I wanted to highlight around C. diff, though, is that C. diff, the numbers of C. diff is of a particular concern to our Chief Nursing Officer for England, because that is the case everywhere. C. diff, last year into this year has been a big issue, and there is a big review looking at what else we need to do from that. We will start reporting our numbers against Southwest London and London and National in the coming months for Quality Committee, but we're not an outlier. As sad as it is with the high numbers, we're not an outlier. C. diff is a big issue for the country at the minute.
Thank you, Arlene. I know that Quality Committee take great care over this, Andrew and Aruda, don't they? So I'm hoping there's no particular points we need to follow up at board. Everyone content to receive this report for assurance? Yeah. Thank you very much indeed. Moving on to the finance report. We've already had a little bit of this in Anne's report. Andrew.
I'll try and keep this very brief. We approved revised forecast positions for both trusts. Actually, no, we didn't. Sorry, but that's just more to do with the torturous process of the NHS. We had been reporting against our approved plans previously and showing adverse positions for both trusts against those plans internally. Externally, we were still being asked to report forecasts to plan. Following review and the issue of national funding, as we discussed at the last month, we've been able to improve the Epsom St Helier forecast to plan, to return it to plan, and the financial position as reported here is consistent with that position, and our forecast remains that we will achieve that by the year end. At St George's, the additional actions and funding that was available allowed us to improve the forecast but not returned to plan. So we moved to a 30 million deficit as opposed to was in excess of 40 at that point. That's still 15 million adverse from the plan, which is a 15 million deficit. Sorry, lots of coincidentally similar numbers. At this reporting period, we are on track against that forecast, and we remain confident that we can deliver that by the year end. One of the points noted earlier was around additional industrial action. The revised forecasts that we developed, we were asked to work on the assumption there would be no further industrial action. Didn't say there wouldn't be, but it was also silent on what would happen if there was. We are being asked, the reporting period we are just in the process of completing, we have been requested to report the impact of the most recent industrial action as an adverse position against the plan. That just means we will be off plan, but only in relation to that. It is unclear whether that will be an allowable miss, or there will be more funding made available to us, or indeed we will be asked to address those issues. That's a watch this space issue. But they are asking us to recognise the adverse position that results from that industrial action.
Thank you, Andrew. So I suppose that's helpful. No questions? I think we're all clear on the numbers, and thank you for the report. We're asked to note it. People are happy to do that. We'll move on to the Integrated Quality and Performance Report. I'm sorry, we're a bit later than I would have liked for this, because we've got quite a lot to get through. James, do you want to introduce it? Then I was going to go James, Kate, Thurza. But we'll take it in those chunks. Is that okay?
Thank you. I'll be brief in terms of an overall summary, and as you've indicated, James, Kate and Thurza can take specific questions and more detail in the commentary. We've picked up a lot of the detail earlier on in the agenda, but I think we should note, as Andrew pointed out, there was a Never event at St George's related to wrong site surgery in October. The data presented in this report reflects data that has been reviewed at the Quality Committee and the Finance Committees in November, so it's largely October data. And we may need to give some consideration when board meetings are distant from relevant committees as to how up to date the data should be at this board meeting. In terms of other quality areas to note, we have ongoing adverse variants for HSMR mortality rates at Epsom St Helier, although some signs of improvement. Ongoing challenges in terms of timely risk assessments of VTE, venous thromboembolism, risk assessments at Epsom St Helier, and noting a difference between pressure ulcer incidents at St George's and Epsom St Helier, with Epsom St Helier having particularly low levels of reporting and George's higher levels, and I think there's more work to do to get a better understanding of those differences. We've talked about the impact of industrial action affecting performance. That withstanding, I think there are many areas of very good performance across both sites. We have seen some stabilisation in the total number of patients waiting for treatment, either through our outpatients or elective pathways, and I think that reflects some really good transformational and operational oversight at both trusts. But that said, we've got challenges in the numbers of patients waiting 52 weeks and 65 weeks at both trusts, with more pressure at Epsom St Helier than at St George's. And I'm sure James will pick up some of the ongoing work to support community paediatrics and gynaecology. I think Anne noted the really good progress in diagnostic waiting times and some of the good operational work at both sites to improve theatre utilisation that hopefully will translate to more theatre activity. Anne's already picked up the cancer challenges with ongoing really good benchmarking work at Epsom St Helier, but a few areas of challenge at George's. And earlier in the meeting, we discussed both the operational and clinical effects of the pressures within our urgent and emergency care pathways. So I won't go over the detail of that any further. And then in terms of integrated care, I think we should note the focus on trying to have more proactive support for urgent community response, and the waiting times are still good, and a focus through winter to improve virtual ward capacity and utilisation.
Thank you, James, for that overview. So what I'm going to do is move on, as I say, to James first, then take any questions on ESTH, then Kate, and then any questions on George's, and then Thursday, and then any questions on the community services. If there's any questions on personnel, HR, we'll take those at the end. Right, James, anything you need to flag up?
Not particularly. I'll try and leave the time for questions. I mean, I think what I would say is we've put quite a bit of capacity into community paediatrics now. So we've got a new locum and we've got the outsourcing as well. So we are confident of getting back under the maximum weight being 52 weeks for that by the end of the year, which is really good. So and similarly, we've got quite a lot of capacity going into gynae. I think the challenge for us is about sustaining under 52-week weights. We understand that might be a national performance standard next year, and given that we've still got very high levels of referrals coming in, I think the two particular positives I'd probably flag are around the theatre utilisation improvement, which has just been really absolutely huge, and I think we're going to be above 80 on the next reported month for CAPT. And also the fact that we're now back within the national standard for diagnostic reporting as well. So lots of good things. Massive challenges on the urgent care pathway still, but we're finding areas to sustain that performance. I think on the diagnostics, just one thing to flag it that we need to look at through business planning is that we've used, although we don't have a community diagnostic centre in Epsom St Helier, we've used community diagnostic centre funding for backlog reduction in 23-24. Our early understanding for 24-25 is that because we don't have a CDC, we may be denied access to that funding, in which case we're going to need a lot of mutual aid from the rest of South West London, because otherwise there's a risk that that performance can't be sustained. So that's just something, because we're all in various bits of South West London, I think it's worth us just keeping an eye on that.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, James. But lots to celebrate there. Thank you. Any questions for James on any of the performance stuff? No? Okay, great stuff. Kate?
So I'll be very brief as well. I suppose areas to highlight. Positive is our ability to maintain.
Kate, have you switched your machine on?
Sorry, yeah.
We've managed to maintain reasonably good performance in long waiters and at least hold our own and bring some of those down. Theatre utilisation has improved and continues to improve. There's a lot of focus on that, and I think that's beginning to bear fruit. Cancer is our area of real challenge, and it continues to be challenging. We're having Tara spending a whole day today going through every PTL again. There's still been some drop balls. There's something about learning about how do people sustain improvements that have made. The positive thing is, though, because two of the key drivers for poor cancer performance are skin, which has seen a big uprise in referrals, and we've got some recovery planning in there, and breast, but we have now agreed the breast business case, and that has been a journey of getting the team to agree what the model will look like, doing the necessary job planning, and obviously getting the financial support. But I'm pleased to say we can tick in all of those boxes now, and we're implementing the new workforce. So I'm hoping in time that will deliver more sustained breast performance, because you can see the breast performance is really not where it needs to be. Although it was FDS compliant, we're overall not FDS compliant. So cancer's the area we're really needing to spend a lot of time on at the moment. And then obviously ED, I think we've talked about that today. The only thing I would say in terms of flow is I'm pleased to say we now have in practice an integrated transfer of care team. So we have offices that people are sharing and beginning to come and sit into together. And I genuinely think that will really help us improve relationships between health, social care and community and voluntary sector, and have some of those discussions face to face and in the moment, rather than sending people lists and waiting for feedback. So I think it would take a little bit of time to bed in, but I'm confident that that will begin to make a difference in a few weeks and months' time.
Thank you, Kate. That's very good to hear. Andrew.
Yeah, so just a question on cancer performance. What I don't understand is why we're not talking about mutual aid across the two organisations. So if I know that Skin and Gynae are challenged a bit at Epsom St Helier as well, but why aren't we looking at it as the whole cohort of patients and how we deal with them most effectively? And that I guess would particularly apply then to breast, which I'm assuming is not so challenged at Epsom St Helier. Or have you got breast? You haven't got breast at Epsom St Helier.
I don't think we do anything that we could help with, but we're always really happy to look at it.
But you have got Skin and Gynae, and I guess the question is.
So our Skin and Gynae at the moment is within our FTS is as I think as challenged as Georgia is. And actually for our routine Gynae, we looked at whether we could move some routine Gynae over to Georgia's, and actually we realised that actually we would potentially be further destabilising.
Okay, so you looked at it. Yeah.
Jacqueline?
Can I just ask about dermatology? So the APC is doing a big piece about dermatology because they're not really working well together as a group of dermatologists across the piece. They all wanted a different way of doing telederm. So what we're trying to do is we're really working with them about how we bring them together so that they're all that it doesn't matter where the referral goes to, the dermatologist across will look at them. So if it's a referral to you, I can look at yours even though I might be in Kingston and you might be at Epsom St Helier. So to try and streamline, because we've got differential dermatology waiting times, but the other big piece of work is actually how we implement teledermatology that is actually will work, because the dermatologist is quite clear about the standard of picture they need to see, and it has to be medical photography grade. And we're just working with Royal Marsden Partners, and we've asked Callie the question, where, because she's the national cancer czar as well, where has got a really good teledermatology system, because we'll implement it across the lot and try and get them to work as one, because we're not going to manage this by continue to work as 4 different departments, all with different ways of working and all with different IT. So that is where we're trying to get to, Andrew, but it's going, and we're getting there, but it's been a bit longer than we wanted them. Just hope that helps a bit.
Money might help focus people's minds on the APC.
I'm sure it will. But the biggest bit is the telederm, and that will cost some money, but we need to find the right system.
Yeah. Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you. Anything else on Georgia's, or can we move on to integrated care? Versa.
Yeah, so just a couple of things to pick up on. One is actually on the back of what Kate was saying. It occurred to me that for both Surrey Downs and Sutton, we have the lead responsibility for running the transfer care hubs. And because of that, we're able to bring the board, but also into the partnerships, much more detailed information about how long patients are waiting from the time that they are deemed fit to be discharged from hospital. And if Kate and I will work together to get the same metrics so we can provide the same visibility across the whole of the gesh system, and I think that will be really helpful. I think in that understanding that we have around what's happening for both Epsom and St Helier Hospital, so into the different systems, overall our performance is being maintained, but we still have areas for people being discharged to care homes in the Sutton area, and for people who are self-funders in the Surrey Downs area that we are particularly focused on. So I think that's work that is ongoing, but I think it was that granularity of data that I thought I wanted to highlight. The second thing to highlight is in relation to the Mary Seacole unit, which people will be aware of because we talked about it earlier, that we transferred a community hospital and our acute frailty unit onto the Epsom site. It is a very large unit, and we are maintaining an active involvement in terms of understanding whether the way of working across such a large unit is right and whether there are different things we should be doing in terms of making sure we don't lose the ethos of a frailty unit because of the size and the acuteness of some of the care that's provided there. So that is the subject of a comprehensive improvement plan across a number of areas. And the third one is just because it fits in with the conversation around children's services. Within Sutton, we have the responsibility for children's therapy services, and we are noticing an increase in the number of referrals for speech and language therapy and OT, which is to be expected. It means the waiting lists are increasing, and we're working very hard with partners to see how we maintain a standard that is appropriate for parents and the process that their children are following. And then I would just finally say we are in early conversations with both local authorities who are going through the same process we are in terms of looking at what budgets look like for next year, and just having the conversations to ensure that any difficult decisions that need to be made are made as a partnership without an inadvertent impact on one part of the system by another part of the system.
Any questions for Thurza about integrated care?
I just want to say what joy it brings me to hear about you talking together to do a lot of this stuff and standardise. It's just really great, so well done.
Yes, it is. We just want to see even more progress on that. So I don't want to put Angela in the position of trying to give an overview of something that she's only been here a few days, but if there are any questions on any of the HR information that you want to flag up, it may be that you want to flag it up now, and if Angela is able to say something, fine. If not, we could take it offline. Is there any queries on any of that? No? Okay, so that'll give you another month or so, Angela, to get properly up to speed. If we could note that report, colleagues, thank you very much. And that takes us on to item 3.5 and the emergency preparedness, resilience and response annual submission. The two reports were slightly different. I mean, they covered some of the same material and one of them had more. So in future it would be good to see that in the same format. I don't know how that is achieved, but anyway, that's just something that struck me. So James, yours is on the agenda first, so over to you.
Thank you. I mean, I'll largely take it as read. We declared substantially compliant, and you can see the sort of depth of the work that's been done around EPRR. There are 4 areas where we're amber. I think 3 of them are around the information governance, around the divisional level business continuity plans, and around the internal audit are relatively straightforward to address. We've asked for EPRR to go on the IA programme for 24-25, and I met internal audit yesterday. I think the one that's probably slightly more difficult to address is having a really robust lockdown plan, and that's, again, simply, if you just walk through this building, there's so many ways in and out of it. I think it's something that ESTH has always really struggled with. But in overall context, I think it's a positive position. I think we've got a very good EPRR team, and boy, have we needed them over the last 12 months. I mean, if you see the number of incidents they've responded to, I think that's probably the highest it's ever been. So overall, I think it's a very positive position.
Well, that would certainly be my assessment, James. Any questions or comments on this? Thurza?
I suppose it's just worth noting that for this we are organisational based, so this covers both community services and the acute trust.
Thank you, Thurza. Good point. So we're asked to approve the report. I'm not going to read out that long title, and the declaration of compliance. It's quite odd approving these things because they are what they are. But anyway, that's what the recommendation says. People happy to do that? Thank you. So that moves us on to the George's equivalent. Kate?
Thank you, Gillian. When I arrived in the Trust 2 years ago, we didn't have an EPRR lead, and I think we had quite a rocky assessment. Then we've appointed someone about 6 months after I arrived, and we got through with partially compliant last year. I'm pleased to say this year we're substantially compliant. Significant progress is made, is moving a number of key areas from partially to substantially compliant. There's one area which is compliance of IG training, which we're sort of keeping an eye on both divisionally and at site leadership level. And just one other thing to raise, that our CBRN was audited by London Ambulance Service as part of this overall assessment process, and we were commended for some areas of best practice, so really pleased about that. So there's nothing more to say really than pleased to see we're in a much better place than we were before at St George's.
Thank you, Kate, and that comes across. Any questions or comments? Here we're asked to note the assurance outcome. I think I'd have been more comfortable noting the previous one, to be honest.
It was our understanding that we had to ask you to do it. So,
Okay.
We can follow that up with
Do we know whether it's noting or approval? Because we've got separate approaches.
It's typically been approval.
Has it?
Yeah.
Okay. So it may be that that we need that as James said that was the understanding, and we need to approve both. But anyway, can we check that? And I'm sure the board is happy to either note both or approve both. But it seems to me a good story in relation to both trusts. So well done, because I know this is the kind of thankless work that is easy, to be overtaken by various crises, but actually it is about handling crises well, isn't it? So big thank you to both teams, I think. People happy to move on? Yeah, good. So we've caught up a bit of time. We're only a little bit behind. Takes us on to item 3.6 and the group strategy implementation update. James, over to you. And we've got this on part...
It's on part 2 as well, for different aspects of this paper. I just want to start by noting Kath is the author of this paper, and she's sitting in the audience. Just want to thank the strategy team for the work that has been undergone to help in terms of the implementation of the strategy. So we are, I'll take it as read, but we are 8 months since our strategy was launched last year. Just to remind the board that there are 3 core elements to the strategy that relate to local improvement against our 4 care objectives, underpinned by 6 corporate enabling strategies and 9 complex strategic initiatives. In this report, we highlight the progress that we've made in those 3 elements. In terms of the local improvement, the paper outlines that we've made some progress, but there's definitely more that we would wish to do in this coming year, and it sets out how we would like to embed the care elements much more visibly right through the organisation, and make some suggestions about how we would implement this at individual level, team level and organisational level. In terms of the 9 complex strategic initiatives, we need to acknowledge that these are complex multi-year programmes, and therefore we would not expect to have delivered these strategic initiatives at this stage. There's a little bit of detail relating to each of the initiatives, but all of them now have established programmes supported by some governance. They are led by an executive senior responsible officer and have set forward plans and some measures for where we want to go in the next 18 months. I think it's fair to say they are at varying stages of maturity, and we've got significant work to do in this round of business planning, and we'll need to maintain some discipline about how we agree prioritisation of resources to deliver these strategic initiatives against all of the other competing demands for service developments. In terms of the corporate enablers, we had originally set ourselves a timeline to complete and have board sign-off of the enabling strategies by the end of March. The circumstances have changed, and we've faced some operational and personnel changes, but I think it's important that we continue our focus on developing these strategies and don't let too much slippage. That said, we've proposed a revised timeline and touch points with the board in development seminars as suggested in the paper. So I'll pause at that point.
Lovely, thank you, James. And we'll need to think whether we take Tim's point about the timing for the IT strategy, or digital, sorry, showing my age there, whether we make that decision here or we push that into the private discussion. So we only have the discussion once. Anyway, Tim, you wanted to come in.
Yes, if I may, and thank you for making that point, Chairman. I mean, it might be that we could have a fuller conversation later, actually, because I think that we'll probably be exploring some more details, so we might end up with a more sort of rational conclusion. Question I was just going to ask, if I may, was looking for some anecdotal sort of response on this on the care framework. So made a point here about the care framework is now being used by site teams in their communication with staff. I just wondered if you could give me any insight into how that's landing with people. Does this care framework feel that it gels with their kind of lived experience, if you like, within the hospital? So it's something that they feel that they can own and they can get behind and talk to their colleagues about.
Thanks, Tim. Good question. Shall I take a few questions, James, rather than you have to take one and then another one? So Phil, and then Peter.
Thank you, Gillian. And it probably builds on that, because I suppose thinking what was said right at the start of the meeting, where Jacqueline's wish for 2024 is for people to realise that the shining light coming towards them is not a train. I think the E part of care is probably where, if we had to focus and prioritise, it really would be to think about how we're going to empower our colleagues to do, to do more with less, really, is what we're looking for, and to actually help each other and all the things that we need to make sure that light isn't a train, that it's actually. So it's only a sort of an idea, really, is that if you looked at it through that lens, that it is, at the end of the day, it's the colleagues that are going to get us through this year. And so how do we engage with them, lead them, such that they can do that with a slightly easier spring in their step, maybe?
It's such a fundamental question, Phil. Peter.
Thank you. And there's some really helpful, useful detail here, but I just wonder, in terms of, for us at a strategic level, reviewing it, if you like, whether it wouldn't be helpful to have a kind of more RAG-rated system. In other words, knowing whether essentially, if we're on track, green, etc., whether, if it was amber, whether more mitigations were needed to get things back on track. I mean, it's in one sense a simple device, but at a glance progress, it would be helpful to have that. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Any other questions or comments? Yin.
Just about what was set up on page 229 of Diligent about what was promised in 2023, and I noticed that there were a few references to several initiatives taking longer than expected, and I just wondered whether there were any sort of learnings or any lessons that we could derive for sort of future, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Yin. I can't see any other hands, so I think there are 4 points there, James, and James Blythe also wanted to come in on the care framework, Tim's question.
Well, I think that is fundamental, because I think we need. I'd like to be sitting in this board meeting this time next year, that when we go on our board visits and ask about where we have personal objectives, where we are looking to improve, that we have visibility in all areas across the organisation, and that there's a resonance for every staff member, that they understand how they can contribute to moving us to where we want to be over the next 4 to 5 years. Or just anecdotally, on the visit we went to in the diabetes centre, the unprompted, the clinical nurse specialist team leader was talking about, I think in rudimentary terms, there was a recognition that they want to develop their team conversations relating to that care framework. I think there is good progress, or certainly in terms of the formal quality improvement programs that are being developed, they are all overtly being developed against that care framework. But that is work that is being led in a much more structured way with a limited number of staff. I think our site leadership teams are using the care framework, and in terms of the internal site integrated performance reports that are being discussed with divisions. That is, the format of that is against the care framework, and the conversations with the divisions is against the background using an improvement approach against that care framework. So I think certainly at a higher level we are embedding, but there is certainly far more that we can, should, and actually must do to get complete resonance. We have discussed in the paper about how we want to get some better visibility, and an example might be ward accreditation, and how we can develop a more consistent quality improvement board in each of our clinical spaces that is consistent and linked to that care framework. But perhaps James and Kate might want to describe what it feels like, and Thurza, in our 3 sites, and as to what sort of resonance we have with the care framework. Phil, I absolutely agree with you about we can only deliver our strategy through our staff, and they must feel empowered and engaged in order to do that. And we're working in really challenging times. We may have more discussions about how the staff survey, which has just been completed, helps us to develop a structured, integrated plan that links into the E element, and how we can then think about how we set what our engagement and empowerment objective would be across gesh for 24-25. I think in this paper, Peter, you were asking about could we be a little bit more precise in terms of giving the overview. I think we could maybe have a more granular conversation in the next section, in the private section of the board, if that's okay. And Ian, I can't read my own writing about what you were asking. I'm really sorry.
Lessons from the delays.
Oh, lessons from the delays on the strategic initiative. I wrote SIs and I was thinking, oh gosh, that's something different. So I think we have some of the strategic initiatives, such as building your future hospitals, the electronic patient record, outpatient delivery, have had very clear structured programs that were already in place at the time of developing the strategy. The governance in terms of setting up some of the other formal governance frameworks to garner more momentum has potentially been more challenging. I think we've faced a lot of challenges in terms of operational pressures, and we're all very cited on the financial pressures that we face, and how we balance, how we use resources against the absolute need to work towards a balanced financial budget versus the transformational investment that might be needed to deliver some of these initiatives has presented a challenge. But I think we've got the groundwork there. We've developed a PMO team that has given us much more discipline and rigour. We have got a good rhythm and routine about how we get visibility at exec level in our group exec meetings, and there's a regular timetable of how these initiatives get airtime and challenge and support across the executive team. So I feel more optimistic that we've got the groundwork in place, that we can make progress, but we need to be really disciplined about what we promise ourselves in the round and set ourselves up to succeed, and not over-promise. So this business planning round feels very important to take the initiatives forward, or in a knowing way to pause some of the initiatives if other priorities are needed.
Thank you, James. That's really helpful. James, you wanted to speak about the care thingamajiggy.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a huge amount to add to what James said. I think we've got to be realistic about the penetration of any sort of corporate strategy right the way down through the staff, and these things don't kind of always go all the way down and in a consistent way. I think where it is working really well is it drives a different set of conversations. So when we think about sort of divisional performance frameworks, we might have really focused on performance and money previously. It's now causing us to put res metrics and quality metrics, so we get really balanced scorecards. It's causing us to think about how rostering, compliance and budgetary management features into things like water accreditation. It's causing us to look at everything that we do quite a long way down the organisation and take a more holistic approach because it's within that framework. So I think if it keeps on doing that, then it will have had a really positive impact, because it just does kind of round off what we do in a number of areas and cause people to think about every aspect of what we're trying to do as an organisation. Will everyone recognise the precise framework and the objectives within it? Probably not, but I think in that sense it does feel like it has a certain reach, which is quite useful.
Oh, that's encouraging, actually, because it's relatively early days for this kind of thing, isn't it? Jacqueline, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, I think some of this will help when we get, this is what I'm going to say, but when we get to actually beginning to implement it in our HR processes, like appraisals, where actually everyone is appraised on the same document that actually links care with actually their work and their behaviours. Because I think that we're not at that point yet. We've got a bit more work. We've got a bit of work to do in the HR department first, but I think that is where we need to head to, isn't it? Because then it becomes more real when it affects you in terms of your development and your feedback. So that was one thing. I think the other bit about I think Phil was spot on about empowering staff. I think, I talk to James and to Mary a lot about not a lot, but I do talk to them about the QI bit, because actually that is a way into that bit, but we've got a really tiny team. For 17,000 staff, there's only a few of them, and they're doing the best, but there is a question, I think, going forward, at the point at which we can invest. One of the investment areas might be in there, because that's where I think will drive change in behaviours, change in looking at where things they're doing aren't adding value. And actually, I think it will help our staff survey as well. So I think that is the bit for me about, we've got things there, but it's so tiny at the moment. I don't know what you'd say about that, James, because it's your area of responsibility.
So, if I may, it is a very small team. It's 5 individuals to support quality improvement across 17,000 individuals. So, with the best will in the world, quality improvement can't be done onto 17,000 people. So what we need to do as a leadership community is to support specific projects where we can, build capacity, but much more importantly, create the culture and environment that supports a consistent approach and facilitates an inquisitive nature and a consistent methodology whereby people feel empowered to notice where things are not where they would want them to be, and to sense that they're working in an environment that allows them to make change and observe the difference.
Thank you, Jacqueline and James. I think the other part of it is having consistent quality leadership and management right the way through the organisation. So if you've got the QI stuff working, you've got good local leaders and managers, then you can really motor on all of this, I think. Okay, recognising that we're going to have a discussion in part 2 and there might be some tweaking of dates or whatever, we're asked now to note the progress, agree the revised timelines, and then some more noting about the business planning process, reviewing what we can afford and where we can accelerate progress. People happy to support that? Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. So that takes us on to the closing administration. Any new risks and issues identified? I don't think there are any new risks. Stephen, you're my risk person.
I wouldn't say there are any new. I mean, we've talked about a number of risks, but they are on the risk register, and it may just be that we need to reflect on that and update in light of most recent developments. But I think they are on there.
Yeah, that was my view as well. Thank you for that. We do have some any other business. I don't like it, but there's 2 good reasons. The first is that this is Aruna's last meeting, and she's going on to pastures new. but she'll talk about that, I hope, when she responds to me, or to us. I wanted a big thank you, Aruna. You've been a stalwart member of the ESTH board, and you've brought your energy, your flair, your wonderful interpersonal skills. I know you know a lot of staff in the organisation, and you will be very badly missed. So I just wanted to say a big thank you on behalf of all of us. You chaired the ESTH equivalent of half of the People Committee for a period of time. You gave ESTH an enormous amount of help around risk, which is your professional expertise, and latterly you have been chair of Quality Committee and then co-chair. So you've done a whole range of roles, and underneath all of that you've always been there for people. Always a support, always an arm around the shoulder when people are needing it. And I know a lot of people have really appreciated that. I have certainly appreciated it. Sometimes at non-executive level, I felt that you were one of my few friends at ESTH. It did change quite rapidly, but it was as you and I will recall, it was a very different atmosphere when I turfed up at ESTH for the first time. And found that there was no expectation that the chair chaired the meeting. Well, you can imagine that went down really badly with me. I had to tell people that the chair meant the chair. So we've come a long way together, Aruna, and I will miss you, as we all will, as a colleague and friend, and we wish you the very best. So, your opportunity now.
Thank you very much, Gillian. I really appreciate that. What can I say? It's been a pleasure and a real privilege to work with everybody around the table. I think I've built friendships, which is invaluable. I mean, and that's why I do these things. I think, you know, meeting people from different walks of life and building those lifelong friendships, I think, are invaluable. So I will be in touch. I know I have a lot of you on WhatsApp, so I will continue to stay connected. I've learned so much, and I will sorely miss coming here. There's no doubt about that. I feel like I've been here forever and learned so much. In terms of the pastures new, I don't know how much I can say just yet, but I won't be going very far away, shall we say, and I will still stay connected. I think I'll leave it at that until... Not internally. This is public hoard. So, but yeah, no, I'm not going far, is probably where I leave it. It's a promotion. And it's a promotion, yes.
Be a friend to us. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, it's always our service users that are at the heart of this. So, hey, we share a community, so we've got to do the right thing by the community. Thank you, and thank you for supporting me, all of you, and your friendship.
Thank you. Thank you, Aruna. But we have another formal goodbye. Andrew Asprey sitting at the other end there. Andrew doesn't actually leave us until the end of February, but this is the last public occasion, Andrew, that I can thank you for all that you've done, early on just for George's, latterly for both trusts, and to wish you the very best in your new post, which you can now tell everybody about, can't you?
I think so. I'm going to be, yes, thank you, Gillian, thank you everybody, and I feel a bit of a fraud because I'm still around for another 6 weeks after this, so I'm not vanishing, but yes, I'm going to go and be the Managing Director of Essentia, which is the GSTT ENF thing that looks after most of South East London. So I'll be putting many more miles on my motorbike, unfortunately. But thank you, Gillian.
Thank you, Andrew. Right, moving on then to item 4.3, reflections on the meeting. I've asked Aruna to lead this.
Me again. I feel like I'm talking a lot. But, so reflections on the meeting. Wow. I actually think, I'm going to start at the start, I actually think it is absolutely wonderful to be able to walk around the wards and make this real, and I really, really enjoy the format in which we kind of provide feedback I think, with the C in heart in a collaborative partnership way, non-execs and execs, and truly living that, you know, the care and the C part of that. So I think it's a really lovely way to start the meeting. It makes it real because we sit here and look at papers and you know, this helps us contextualize it. And I think what was wonderful was there were a number of times where we went back to and we saw this. I think Anne alluded to it, for instance, when we spoke about estates and we've actually seen it. So I think it makes it really real. So I think we should carry on doing that. It was really good. I actually thought in each of the updates, the discussion that followed was really rich, and what it did in the early part was actually joined up a lot of things. So, for instance, when we spoke about quality, we spoke not just about what was in the report, but other things, you know, such as the ambulance handovers, and that was a really rich discussion, and then joined it up with the performance, and it kind of really brought things together and to light, which I thought was excellent. I think we had, you know, again, I like the idea that the reports are there, we take them as read, and then we open to discussion. And then I do think that everybody, I mean, I know you were running late, Gillian, you were like 35 minutes behind before we started the maternity report, but you caught it up very quickly. And I think that discussion was very valuable, actually, and shouldn't. Yes, I don't think you could have curtailed that. But yeah, you then railed it right back in and brought it in on time. I think the IQPR discussion was, again, very, very rich. And the fact that we now have us all joined up together, you know, Thurza and James and Kate, I thought that worked really well. Yeah, and you know, we have some insight on the strategy piece, but we will be talking more about it later on, and we're open about that. So, yeah, I mean, what can I say? My last meeting, really enjoyed it. I think we all chipped in, and we brought it in on time.
Thank you, Aruna. Well, and I probably should have said you're always a half-full person. So you would always try to see the best in a situation, but never shirk from saying something that has to be said. So thank you very much for that. Any other reflections people wanted to make about the meeting? Oh, Jacqueline, sorry. I thought it was Anne, which was actually signalling.
Yeah, it's like what I do to you.
Yeah.
So I think I thought it felt quite together, actually. You know, the more we having this and the more time we spend together and more things we're doing as an executive and a board together, the more it feels that we are beginning to move as one, which we're not quite there yet, but it feels like it's in a better place. I think the only bit my reflection is, and I was more conscious about Angela, and then I was also thinking, we've got some people in the audience here, that we know we're terrible in acronyms, and we use them an awful lot. And for somebody who doesn't, you're here as either a patient or a carer, or you're brand new to the NHS, you would have no idea about half of the conversations, because we must be sounding like we're talking double Dutch. So I think there is something about, and we're terrible in the NHS, we love an acronym. So just us to be more thoughtful about when we're presenting stuff, to make sure we try and move away from acronyms. And it just struck me for the first time in a long time how we speak in the NHS lingo, and how people who are not in the NHS must wonder what on earth we're talking about.
Yeah, good point, Jacqueline. Yeah, we'll try and remind ourselves of that. Any other points before I close the meeting? We don't actually have a patient or staff story. Sadly, we did have one lined up, but the patient concerned has had issues that mean they couldn't be here. So that will be delayed to another meeting. So I'm going to close the meeting and then move on to questions. And Mr. Harwood has sat very patiently and listened to the whole of the morning's debate. So welcome, Mr. Harwood, and thank you so much for listening for all that time. I hope it wasn't too tedious and there weren't too many acronyms, but you have a question for us. So over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. And absolutely not. I'm familiar with board meetings, and really, it's a great opportunity and actually a privilege to listen in and appreciate the way your directors, non-directors, non-execs drill down. So I'm very comfortable with what you've been covered. So I do have a stake here in St George's. As Queen Mary's has been building my artificial legs since I was 4 years old. Wow. And it is absolutely true that it's only through the work of yourselves, specifically, obviously, Queen Mary's and the clinicians and consultant, who have enabled me to have a very full life, and I continue to do so. The mobility side is important. So my question, which I posted ahead, again, I'll make it brief because I know you're moving forward. So my question, which I posted ahead, is can the board clarify if it is a requirement that patient representatives from the hospital user group should participate in the preparation, evaluation process when St George's is inviting bids for a new contract for limb fitting?
So thank you very much indeed for your question. And in a way, I'm sorry you've had to come and ask it. But nevertheless, thank you. And I had no idea when I read the question that your association with us was quite as long as from when you were 4. So there's probably a really good patient story there somewhere.
Yes, perhaps.
But Kate, I think you're going to answer Mr. Harwood's question, are you?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Harwood, for being here, and it's a pleasure to meet you. And I absolutely agree, a patient story would be lovely another time. I wanted to say, well, best practice would absolutely dictate that we should support and enable user group involvement in procurement processes. I understand on this occasion, having looked into it, this didn't happen during that procurement process, and the reasons for that was the timeline became very congested and short, which we're looking into why that happened. However, my understanding is that one of the managers leading on the process came and met with the user group or representatives of the user group after the procurement had gone out, but before the decision was made for the procurement to be awarded. And the comments and issues raised by the user group were absolutely used in helping support a decision about the successful tender. So, but you're absolutely right. It would normally be best practice to involve throughout the process, and I'm sorry indeed if that hasn't happened. And I'm really happy to pick this up with you outside as well, if that's helpful.
If I can just make a short response, Chairman. Our concern is that when our clinician did ask the question, what about our user group, for which I do lead, and obviously there was I was supported during the meeting you referred to. The concern is that the clinician was actually told, no, that won't be necessary. And we just wonder, with respect, whether the use of a sourcing consultancy, Health Trust Europe, in fact, part of HSC, was a reason why that was actually going to be confusing for them. And that was the reason why we were not involved, as we were for the previous contract and followed up through the meetings. It is a concern when one delves in a little more. We don't want any suggestion that our NHS service is being slided towards private. There is a very strong private source of service already in this country. But when one looks at it, I'd like to be reassured that no conflict of interest was possible. So, that's the reason for bringing in the question, as well as actually getting the patients, because a lot of us, we're giving back. We're not waiting out in the car park when we don't know what to do with our lives. We have ample lives, and we're giving extra, sensibly, positively.
Absolutely. I'm very clear when I saw the question and some of the background. that we'd failed, actually. Yes, we'd found a mechanism by which there'd been a meeting, and I hope that that's covered everything that it should have covered. Nevertheless, we certainly didn't meet our own standards, which is about putting patients at the heart of what we do, and there should have been proper consultation. So on behalf of the board, Kate's already said it, but I do want to reiterate our apologies to you and your committee, who give a lot of time to help us deliver the best possible service. So we didn't meet our own standards, let's be quite clear about that. And that's something we need to reflect on and challenge ourselves on. So I'm grateful to you for bringing the question, for enabling the board to reflect on the things that we say that we want to do, and when we actually don't manage to do it. And you've done it in the most delightful way. You could have done it very differently, if I might say so, and people often do. I think the learning will be more profound because of the way that you chose to make your point, and I want to thank you for that, and try to give you some, it can only be reassurance, because you need to see assurance, but in terms of evidence, don't you, that we will do rather better next time. But these kind of things are happening all the time. We're talking about a service that has a big impact on you and some of the people that you know well's lives, but it's happening in other services all the time, and we need to satisfy ourselves that, as I say, the things that we say that we believe in and we subscribe to about the centrality of patients actually permeates through in how we do our work day to day.
That's right.
So I do want you to hear our apology and also our commitment to learn from that.
Thank you. And as sign-off is either happened or about to happen, then the addressing of the points I've made would be really important and helpful.
Well,
to be reassured.
Yes, I'll ask Kate to come back to you specifically on those, and thank you again. Jacqueline, did you want to come in?
I do. So it was beautifully done. So thank you so much. I think we wouldn't dream of buying new kit without engaging our consultants if they were using it, or our nurses if they were using it. So I think we need to move towards, if we're buying kit that has an effect for patients, as which is a wonderful example. It's your, it's fundamental to your well-being, isn't it? Having good fitting limbs.
It is, yes.
That actually we need to sort of make that next move to routinely engaging patients, whether it be food or whether it be prosthetics or something else. So I think it is something we need to, with Andrew, who runs the procurement, we do need to make sure that we have that extra arm to it that I don't think we've got as a routine, and embed that.
Right. The longevity of it is that I started with willow and steel, and I'm now on carbon fibre and microprocessors. So with all that comes even more care over who's doing what and how it was done, and the specification that NHS England have. And we are in touch as a group and nationally as well with NHS commissioners. So we are well aware that from that side, that's the part that should be underpinning, because it all moves forward, as well as different ways in which you, as a trust, receive your monies from NHS London. So thank you for your responses.
Well, thank you, because you've provided both a question and a patient story.
Oh, right, okay. I better sit down then.
Thank you again. Right, colleagues, it's 1 o'clock. I'm going to start the private